Chapter 384. Shiju couldn't help but sigh. He knew that she didn't hear him. That day I wasn't following her. She had a type of perfume on her that attracted butterflies to her carriage. This type of perfume is unique to the Wise King family. I didn't know where she got it from and wasn't sure if it was the same type of perfume, so I followed her for a while. I didn't expect her to misunderstand and think that I was a lecher. At that time I was too lazy to argue with her. I also recognized that the perfume was similar to my family's perfume and not the same type, so I left. Even if my taste is bad, it wouldn't be that bad. How could I be charmed by such a woman? Shiju explained. So it was such a misunderstanding. Ning Xuema felt that it was a little funny and couldn't help but look up at Miss Xiangming. The truth this time would probably have a big impact on this young lady. After all, the reason why Miss Xiangming was so famous was because of the legendary perfume on her body that could attract butterflies to dance around her. Now it seemed that this perfume wasn't natural but applied later. Her legend had been broken in front of so many people, so it was no wonder that she looked like she had suffered a blow. When she heard Shiju's last sentence, she couldn't help but laugh. Your taste is quite high. I don't know what kind of woman can enter your eyes in the future. She was just joking, but she didn't expect Shiju to look at her. His eyes darkened. What do you think? Ning Xuema was a little frightened by his gaze and laughed. How would I know? She was about to say something to change the topic, but she didn't expect Shiju to smile. You know, Xuema? He called her name softly and firmly, making Ning Xuema's heart jump again. She felt that he had more to say. Sure enough, he paused and continued. I remember there's a saying, if you can't repay a life-saving grace, you should repay it with your body. Ning Xuema shuddered and corrected him. Lord Heir, this sentence is usually said by a woman to a man whom she admires and also has a life-saving grace. It's the same the other way around. Xuema. Before Shiju could finish his confession, he was interrupted by the sound of a cup falling to the ground. Bang! A jade cup fell to the ground and shattered into pieces on the green jade floor. The sound was so loud that everyone was shocked. They all raised their heads to look at the source of the sound. My hand slipped. Han Shanyue's voice was indifferent. His tone was calm. The wine cup in his hand had disappeared. No one felt anything was amiss. Lu Hinti immediately ordered a new cup for Han Shanue. This time it was made of mutton fat jade, which was still a treasure of the palace. Ning Xuema didn't have any other thoughts. She just felt that the sound of the wine cup falling to the ground was a little too loud. That sound seemed to ring in her mind, and she couldn't help but shiver. And this chaos also made Shiju lose the best opportunity to confess. He wanted to talk to Ning Xuema again, but Lu Hinti suddenly became a chatterbox. He kept asking him all kinds of questions and chatted with him, making him unable to pick up the topic of conversation with Ning Xuema. Although Shiju was talking to the emperor, he always took care of Ning Xuema, who knew how many pairs of eyes were red from anger. A girl couldn't help but suddenly say, Your Highness, this is your first time here. Have you heard of the calamitous star? Chapter 385. This sentence was full of malice and was obviously referring to something. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows and glanced at the girl. That girl had the most ordinary appearance among all the girls present. Usually, when these noble girls gathered, she was always the one who was ignored. She was already full of dissatisfaction. Later on, when she saw that Ning Xuema was the most unwelcome person here, she actually felt very happy and felt much better. Now that she saw that Ning Xuema actually made a comeback and was favored by the Honorable Ming King's heir, this made her feel extremely dissatisfied. In a moment of hot-headedness, she actually jumped out and said such a thing. Ning Xuema's face sank and was about to say something when Shiju, who was usually not good with words, said faintly, This heir has never believed in these strange things. The heir is still young and perhaps doesn't understand this. The heavenly lone star is a jinx that brings bad luck to her parents, brothers, husband, and everyone close to her. That girl did not give up. This heir is indeed young and doesn't know so much at your age. Whether or not the heavenly lone star is a jinx, it isn't to be believed. However, an ugly, old, and mischievous girl is a living person. It is unavoidably annoying. Young miss, don't you think so? Shiju spoke again. These words clearly hit the girl's weak spot. That girl was already 20 years old and was still unmarried because of her ugly appearance. In this era, Girls were generally married at the age of 16 or 17. Her age was indeed considered old. In addition to the long-term imbalance in her heart and endocrine imbalance, her face looked 4 or 5 years older than her actual age. She hated it when people asked about her age. Of course, she was even more disgusted when people said the words old and ugly. Shiju's words directly made her exquisitely painted face turn green. Ning Xuema could not help but burst out laughing. She did not expect that Shiju, who was not good with words, would have such a sharp time. It made her see him in a new light. The surrounding people could not help but laugh. That girl simply wanted to find a hole to hide in. She did not dare to fall out with Shiju, so she stomped her feet and ran away while sobbing. The small disturbance seemed to have passed just like that, and the banquet resumed its lively state. Ning Xuema sighed inwardly. She already understood the gist of Shiju's intentions. She could also roughly guess why he had returned to her side with his identity today. He was just eager to prove himself in front of her, and wanted to be on equal footing with her. He also wanted to give her some face, however. It was not so easy to remove the heavenly cursed Lone Star hat that was placed on her head. After all, Shiju was still a half-grown child. He was young and hot-blooded. He didn't care, but that didn't mean that the family behind him wouldn't care. The rules of such a big family were much more than the rules of the imperial palace. He was also the successor of Bright King. How could the family behind him allow him to marry a heavenly calamity star? She looked at the 4 silent guards behind him. When they looked at her, their eyes secretly flashed with vigilance. She reckoned that after this banquet, Shiju would be sent back to the clan by them, and not be allowed to see her again. She probably couldn't even be friends with him. This might be the last time they would see each other. Originally, she was glad that she finally had a real and trustworthy bodyguard. Chapter 386. Originally, she was glad that she finally had a real and trustworthy bodyguard. Now, it seemed that it was still an illusion. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel sad and unknowingly drank 8 or 9 cups of wine. After all, she was drowned once today. Although she managed to keep her life, her throat was burning and her head felt like it was filled with paste. Her reaction was much slower than usual. Now that she drank more wine, her dizziness became worse. Today she suddenly had the idea of getting drunk. She felt that the maid beside her was too slow, so she simply grabbed the wine jug and drank by herself. Anyway, today's wine wasn't strong. It was like sugar water, making her want to drink more. Xuema, don't drink anymore. Her wrist was held by Shiju. She turned her head and saw that Shiju's eyebrows were almost twisted into 3 characters. He was looking at her with admiration. Do you have something on your mind? Something on my mind? Where did she have it? Ning Xuema took back her wrist and said with a smile, today is such a happy day. We shouldn't go home without getting drunk. Shiju, you're a man. Do you dare to drink a few cups with me? Your alcohol tolerance can't be worse than mine, right? What did she mean by he was a man? He was originally a man with an indomitable spirit, okay? Shiju raised his eyebrows. Okay. I'll drink with you. If you get drunk, I'll carry you home. Good. If you get drunk, I'll let your bodyguard carry you home. Ning Xuema clapped her hands. Shiju was speechless and stared at her. I thought you would say that if I get drunk, you'll carry me back to your Marquis Ning residence. Ning Xuema smiled. That won't do. My temple is small and can't accommodate a god like you. Xuema. Shiju frowned and called out to her. Are you trying to distance yourself from me? Hee, of course not. Come, let's drink. To be honest, I've been with you for so long, but I've never seen you drink. Is it really okay for a child like you to drink? I heard that children shouldn't drink alcohol as much as possible. It's harmful to their brain cells. She definitely didn't understand the latter half of her modern words. But he understood the general meaning. He couldn't help but feel speechless. He raised his head and knocked on her head. What nonsense are you talking about? You're younger than me. Ning Xuema's reaction was a little slow. She didn't dodge his fingers and was hit on the forehead. He didn't know how to control his strength, so he knocked on her head until it hurt a little. She didn't want to lose out, so she raised her hand and knocked back. Shiju was much more clear-headed than her, and he grabbed her wrist again. Her wrist was slender and white, and it felt especially smooth in his hand. Shijue was stunned for a moment. His eyes deepened as he looked at Ning Shuema. He opened his mouth and was about to say something when he suddenly felt a chill on the back of his waist. It was as if something cold had drilled into his body. He was shocked and subconsciously touched his lower back, but he didn't feel anything unusual. He looked back suspiciously and saw 4 guards standing behind him like door gods. With them here, if someone was plotting against him, there was no reason that he couldn't detect it. What's wrong? Ning Shuema saw his suspicious expression and asked. Nothing. Come, let's continue drinking. Shiju didn't finish his sentence when his expression suddenly changed and he hurriedly stood up. What's wrong now? Ning Shuema had already raised her wine cup. I'll go out for a while. Shiju hurriedly went out. His footsteps were very hurried. Ning Shuema didn't mind and drank by herself. After a while, Shiju came back and sat beside her again. Chapter 387. When the two of them were about to drink again, Shiju's expression changed again and he hurried out again. Just like this, in less than an hour, Shiju went back and forth 4 times. Naturally, the guards behind him also went in and out 4 times. Luhin-Ti asked with concern, Is there anything wrong with the air? Shiju's pale face was a little red. Probably because of the cold wind. My stomach hurts a little, but it's already much better. Just as he finished speaking, his expression changed. He cursed under his breath and hurried out again. It turned out that the air had diarrhea. Everyone present looked at each other. In the end, many people's gazes fell on the half-drunk Ning Shuema. The Heavenly Lone Star was indeed worthy of being called the Heavenly Lone Star. The heir had only sat and drank with her and his stomach was already in pain. After a long while, one of Shiju's guards came in and bowed to Luhin-Ti. Your Majesty, the heir is slightly unwell. He asked this subordinate to come and ask for leave. Luhin-Ti nodded slightly and asked a few questions with concern. The guard answered one by one and thanked him. Finally, he said, My heir ordered this subordinate to escort Miss Ning back to the residence tonight. He turned around and stood behind Ning Shuema like a door god. Although Ning Shuema drank a little too much, her mind was still clear. She frowned. No need. You should go and serve your heir. I have guards and maids. Her guards and maids were waiting outside. The guard did not move and stiffly replied, The heir's orders cannot be disobeyed. All right, then let him be. Ning Shuema no longer paid attention to him and continued to drink. Kirin was someone who wished for the world to be in chaos. It also used its 2 little paws to hold the wine cup and drink cup after cup. It was more enjoyable than drinking water. When Ning Shuema drank a cup, it could drink 4 cups. By the time Ning Shuema noticed, the blue fur on its body had already turned into blue scales. With a plop, it fell onto her body and fell asleep, snoring softly. Ning Shuema was speechless. She had thought that it was a majestic qilin, so its alcohol tolerance must be heaven-defying. It turned out that it was also a silver candle. Now it had become a cat with scales all over its body. She still had to carry it back to the residence later. Naturally, the imperial banquet wasn't just about drinking wine. The ladies of the noble families all presented their talents. There were people who sang softly, people who danced, people who played the pipa, and people who danced with swords. It was as lively as adding oil to a fire. Ning Shuema watched lazily, pouring wine for herself from time to time. Her surroundings were bustling with noise and excitement, but she felt an unprecedented sense of loneliness amidst all the hustle and bustle. This excitement did not belong to her, and neither did she belong here. Another young lady from a noble family presented a gentle dance. After the dance, there was another round of applause. Ning Shuema's reaction was a little slow. She only clapped when the applause stopped. Lonely. The monotonous sound of clapping was scattered and abrupt. It sounded like a booing. The young lady was immediately angry. She glanced at Ning Shuema and asked, Marquis Ning, do you think my dance is not good? Ning Shuema was indeed drunk. She nodded and answered her honestly, It's not bad, but it's not good either. My waist is not soft enough and some of my movements are not on point. My arms and legs are a little stiff. The young lady was speechless. She sneered. It seems that Marquis Ning is an expert in dancing. It's rare that the emperor allows everyone to gather here. Marquis Ning, why don't you present a dance? Let everyone see. Chapter 388. In fact, everyone in Chongkong country knew that Marquis Ning's daughter was not only a good-for-nothing, but also an idiot at dancing. In the past, in order to gain the recognition of others, she had learned dancing from a dance master, but in the end, she was not cut out for it. Her arms and legs were as stiff as a robot's. The dance master sent by the palace was so angry that he ran away, saying that she was rotten wood that could not be carved. This incident and Ning Shuima's reputation as a good-for-nothing were talked about by the people in the capital, becoming another joke. Almost everyone present knew that the woman's words were obviously to checkmate Ning Shuima. Unexpectedly, Ning Shuima turned her cup and looked at her. She put down the cup and stood up. Then I will dance. The idiot at dancing was actually going to dance. Many people who had been drinking until now were a little tipsy. They loudly cheered and applauded her, calling out dance, 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 obviously treating her like a clown. Ji Yunhuang's face darkened as he coldly glanced at everyone who was obviously excited. Everyone was swept by his cold gaze and finally woke up. They sat down embarrassedly and did not dare to make a fuss. Shuima, you are drunk. You don't need to dance. Ji Yunhuang helped Ning Shuima to smooth things over. Seeing her being isolated by everyone, he also felt a little sad, but he also had his own difficulties. Ning Shuima's heart was filled with an inexplicable fire that she wanted to release. She ignored Ji Yunhuang's attempt to smooth things over and only looked at the clothes on her body. She was currently wearing a palace dress. It looked good, but it was a little complicated and seemed to drag on. She raised her head and asked Lihin Ti, Your Majesty, this humble subject wants to change into another set of clothes. Lihin Ti's eyes flashed slightly, but he was also straightforward, approved. Ning Shuima smiled. Thank you, Your Majesty. When she bowed, she even staggered a little. When she got up, her eyes inadvertently met with Han Shangyue, who was beside her. He sat there and looked at her indifferently, without any emotions in his eyes. Of course, Ning Shuima could not see his face clearly. Even if there were emotions in his eyes, she could not see them. Therefore, she calmly turned her eyes away and followed a maid down the stairs. There were many singers in the royal gardens, so naturally, there were also many clothes of different colors. After a while, Ning Shuima appeared in front of everyone's expectations, as if they were watching a joke. Everyone's eyes lit up when they saw how she was dressed. After more than a month of recuperation, Ning Shuima had not only grown taller, but her figure had also become more exquisite. What should be protruding was protruding, and what should be perky was perky. Earlier, she was wearing a loose dress, but now she had changed into a tight red dress. Long Sky's culture was relatively open. While the ladies from big families dressed more conservatively, the dancers' clothes were still very eye-catching. And Ning Shuima's outfit was even more eye-catching. Her upper body was a red tube top embroidered with peony flowers, and the outer cover was a bright red translucent shawl. Below, she wore a fiery red short skirt, and a thin translucent shawl of the same color was tied around her waist, fluttering with her movements. A pair of pink long legs were faintly discernible under the shawl. Her feet were bare, and a thin silver chain was tied around her snow-white ankles. There were 2 crystal bells on the silver chain, and they jingled as she walked. Her long hair was like a waterfall, draping over half of her body. There was a circle of flowers on top of her head, and a flower the size of a teacup was in full bloom. Her arms were also bare, and there were also silver bells on her wrists. Her feet seemed to be stepping on some kind of rhythm, so the silver bells on her body rang. Chapter 389. Ding ling ling, ding ling ling. It was as if she was playing some kind of music. She was born beautiful, and now she had deliberately put on makeup. There was a flame-shaped flower between her eyebrows, which made her eyes look like flowing water. When she turned her head slightly, it was overflowing with light and color, making her look like she was flying. Red clothes, black hair, red clothes, and snow-white skin. She was like a burning flame, but also like a fire who had fallen into the mortal world, whose eyes would light up. Everyone was waiting for her performance as if they were waiting for a joke, but now that they saw her like this, they all held their breaths. The nobles had seen many beautiful women in their lives. Even if they met a fairy, they would still be able to remain calm. It was very rare for a girl to be able to move their hearts with just her looks. But at this moment, Ning Shuama made their hearts sway. They almost couldn't move their eyes away, and they couldn't even care about the girls sitting next to them. Before she even started dancing, she had already shocked everyone. The girls sitting next to them all secretly clenched their fists. The girl who suggested for Ning Shuama to dance was so regretful that her intestines turned green. Han Shanyue sat there. Seeing her like this, his fingers slowly clenched in his sleeves. 8 out of 10 people's eyes were focused on her pair of snow-white slender feet. They were like 2 crescent moons, and her toenails were pink and glossy like pearls and jade. In the banquet, there were sounds of men swallowing, and some people had already stood up, forgetting their manners. Lu Hinti's heart also felt as if it had been electrocuted, fiercely beating a few times. He knew that Ning Shuama was beautiful, but he didn't expect her to be beautiful to this extent. Especially when matched with her clothes, her every move was able to hook people's souls away. At this moment he wished he could die for her. She was a stunner. No a fairy. No a witch. Shuama, what dance are you dancing? Lu Hinti felt that his voice was a bit dry. Flying in the sky. Ning Shuama spat out 2 words. Although everyone didn't know what flying in the sky was, for some reason, they felt that this girl's dance would definitely be shocking. Ning Shuama's figure spun around as she started to jump. In her previous life, she was a master of both singing and dancing. Jazz dance, street dance, classical dance, and even pole dance, she had dabbled in them all. When she danced, she was like a dancing fairy, making people intoxicated. And this flying Apsara's dance was something she had comprehended in her dream. At that time, she was traveling to Dunhuang and saw the flying Apsara's mural. After she came back, she had a dream. In the dream, a young lady in fiery red clothes was dancing gracefully. Bounce back the pipa and sing. When she woke up, she remembered the dance steps but forgot the lyrics of the song. At least she remembered the tune of the pipa. Because of this dream, she excitedly went to learn the pipa for a period of time. Now it had come in handy. The big strings were as noisy as a downpour, while the small strings were like whispers. There was a cacophony of noise, as beads of all sizes fell onto a jade plate. In the middle of the valley, the singing of orioles and the bottom of the flower is slippery, and the serene spring flows hard under the ice. This was Bai Jui's pipa performance. At this time it was quite appropriate to compare Ning Shuama's pipa performance. The song seemed to come from the horizon, making everyone unable to help but be immersed in the music. And the beauty of her dance had made the dancers on the side collectively speechless. Her waist was extremely soft, and every movement of her hands and feet was breathtaking. Even the most picky dancer couldn't find any fault. Her red clothes danced in the hall. Sometimes she bent over and spun, sometimes she floated up. She was like a flower blooming in the spring breeze, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. The silver bells hanging from her body rang rhythmically with the pipa. It was surprisingly harmonious and pleasing to the ears. Chapter 390. Everyone present was dumbfounded. Even Emperor Luxian had lost his self-control and stood up. The others wanted to cheer, but they were afraid of disturbing her dance and her pipa. All of them held their breaths like wooden sculptures. Originally, there were musicians in the hall to accompany the dancers. When Ning Shuama started to dance, those musicians were eager to give it a try. They wanted to play the instruments at hand to match her pipa music. But as soon as it sounded, everyone glared at it. This was the sound of nature. Any music was blasphemous to it. The musicians did not dare to act rashly. They tried their best to memorize the tune so that they could secretly practice it when they returned. Han Shanyue sat there. His gaze was fixed on Ning Shuama. His fingers clenched the jade cup so tightly that his fingertips turned white. Ding ding dong dong. Suddenly, the sound of a guqin came from outside the window. After a few notes, it was followed by Ning Shuama's pipa. Everyone was angry at first. They were angry that someone did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. They actually dared to go along with this sound of nature. But before they could say anything, they were attracted by the sound of the guqin. Many of the people present knew music. There were also many people who knew how to play the guqin. A few of them were even masters of the guqin. But when they heard the sudden sound of the guqin, they suddenly had the urge to go home and smash the guqin. Compared to the sound of the guqin they played was like sawing wood. The sound of the pipa and the tinkling of the guqin were surprisingly harmonious. If Ningxuama's pipa sound was like a wisp of spring breeze, then the guqin sound was like a flower slowly blooming in the spring breeze. The spring breeze blew, and the flowers bloomed beautifully. This was the true sound of nature, the true meaning. For a moment, everyone forgot to reprimand the person who played the zither. Each and every one of them was mesmerized by the music and looked at it with infatuation. They felt that this song should only exist in the heavens. How many people could hear it in the human world? They only hoped that this guqin, this pipa, this dance would never stop. As expected, the music continued. Ningxuama danced as if she didn't know what fatigue was. Her expression was as if she was possessed. But in her heart, she was complaining incessantly. Before the sound of the piano started, she had already danced to the last verse. She only needed to dance for another half a minute, and she would be able to end it perfectly. But as soon as the sound of the zither came, her feet seemed to be controlled by someone. Her body made all kinds of complicated dance moves, and the sound of the pipa also began to follow the tune of the zither. Her fingertips wandered around the lute until they began to bleed. However, it was as if she had put on a witch's red dancing shoes. She could not stop at all. The sound of the guqin changed from the warm spring flowers to the sound of armored horses and golden spears. It sounded like a broken silver vase, like endless falling trees. It sounded like the betrayal of a lover on the battlefield, and she turned to the arms of the enemy. It sounded sad, indignant, desolate, and unfair. All sorts of negative emotions rushed at him. Some of the people present began to sob, some beat their chests and stomped their feet, some were seething with anger. Clearly, they had been completely controlled by the zither. Furthermore, Ningxuama's beautiful face was beginning to turn pale, and the blood in her chest was beginning to surge. She wanted to stop, but she couldn't. Suddenly, a cold wind blew beside her. Her body had already fallen into someone's embrace. Her dance was forced to stop. Following that, a pair of hands stretched out from behind her. The pipa in her bosom was held by those hands. Clang! 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 These three sounds were like thunder rolling across the sky. It immediately disrupted the tune of the guqin. Chapter 391. The sound of the guqin paused, and the melody changed again. This time, the sound of the pipa did not follow it. Instead, it played a few more notes, like a heavy rain falling from the sky, extinguishing the sadness and resentment created by the guqin in one fell swoop. Ningxuama's body stiffened as a faint fragrance entered her nose. Her mind, which had almost been controlled by the zither, was pulled back. Ningxuama's body stiffened as she sobered up. Her mind, which had nearly been controlled by the zither, was pulled back. She was very familiar with this fragrance. Her expression changed, and she subconsciously wanted to struggle. "You, be good." Han Shanyue's arm tightened, and Ningxuama's body completely fell into his embrace. He did not know which acupuncture point on her body he had casually pressed, but it actually made her unable to move in an instant. His breath was above her head. His arms were wrapped around her, and his fingers did not stop moving across the pipa. The sound of the pipa flowed out from his fingertips, and the melody was also very pleasant to listen to. The sound of the guqin outside was interrupted by the sound of his pipa several times, and was slightly scattered. Ningxuama's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that this Mr. Han Shanyue was fighting with the person playing the guqin outside? But why did he have to hold her in his arms and play? At this time, she was very willing to give the pipa to him. The person playing the guqin outside was obviously not someone to be trifled with. The melody changed again, and it was as cold as the northern wind whistling in the winter. The northern wind blew the white grass on the ground. The people who were just about to wake up from the music immediately felt as if they had stepped into an ice cellar, and began to shiver. Ningxuama also slightly shivered, and wanted to dance again. Suddenly, she felt as if her ears were stuffed with 2 balls of cotton, and the sound of the guqin outside suddenly became much softer. "Be conservative, don't think, don't be sad, don't be happy." A voice seemed to ring out in her mind. This was a kind of cultivation chant. Ningxuama faintly felt that this scene was somewhat familiar, as if she had experienced it before. This was naturally not the time for her to let her imagination run wild. She simply closed her eyes in his embrace and adjusted her breath. She didn't know why, but even though she was clearly annoyed by the person behind her, she was able to quickly enter a meditative state in his embrace and regulate the blood and qi in her body. Han Shanhua held the beauty in his arms, his face still expressionless. However, his hands began to emit a faint white light as he plucked the strings of the pipa. As the sound of the pipa flowed out, it was as if spring had forcibly dispersed the raging cold air, dyeing the frozen ground green inch by inch. The pipa in Ning Xuema's arms was used by the court musicians. Although it was also of high quality, it was still an ordinary instrument. Once Han Shanhua's telekinesis was infused into it, the strings of the normal pipa could not help but vibrate. Pung! A string broke. The sound of the pipa suddenly stopped. The sound of the zither outside took advantage of this gap and immediately became louder. People had just felt the warmth of spring from the sound of the pipa, and now they were brought into the hot summer by the sound of the zither. Everyone felt that the surrounding air was so hot that it was about to burn. Everyone began to sweat profusely. Some people couldn't help but take off their clothes. Some impatient ones even tore off their clothes. Damn it! Han Shanhua's brows furrowed, and his fingers once again pressed on the strings of the pipa. He actually only used the remaining strings to play a beautiful melody. This time, he did not purposely go against the sound of the zither outside. Instead, he played the melody of high mountains and flowing water. The water gurgled, the mountain breeze blew, and white clouds leisurely floated above the peaks. Everyone felt refreshed, and those who were taking off their clothes finally stopped. Chapter 392. Everyone felt as if they were riding on a white cloud, rising higher and higher, higher and higher. If the sound of the guqin wanted to suppress the sound of the pipa, it had to be played at a higher pitch than the sound of the pipa. Hence, the sound of the guqin changed direction, as if it was attached to the sound of the pipa. Everyone felt that the cloud below them was getting higher and higher, almost reaching the clouds. This was not a good feeling. Many people were trembling in fear, desperately lying on the table and hugging the table legs, as if this would be safer. Although Ning Xuema's ears were blocked, the sound of the guqin and pipa were played with psychokinesis, directly hitting the deepest part of people's hearts. Hence, the blocking of her ears did not have much effect on her. She also felt as if she was rising high up in the sky. However, she had many experiences of flying high up in the sky, and was even forced to sit on the back of the golden-eyed eagle, which was 100 times more exciting than a roller coaster. Now this feeling of being in the air was like a drizzle to her, and she did not care about it at all. Everyone else's minds were completely controlled by the sound of the guqin and pipa, but Ning Xuema's mind was clear. She clearly understood that she was still in Han Shanhua's arms, and that person had been hugging her and playing the pipa. Shouldn't this kind of musical battle be focused on nothing? Shouldn't he be concentrating? Shouldn't he be looking for the most suitable and comfortable position to play? Why did he have to pull her into his arms and play? It was so awkward to play the pipa with someone in the middle. Or was there some other reason for him to do this? Did he want to borrow her psychokinesis? But her psychokinesis was only at level 4. How much psychokinesis could she lend to him? Ning Xuema could not figure it out. At this time she could still be distracted. Although Han Shanhua did not look at her, his body was tightly pressed against hers, and he could feel all the breaths in her body. When she was distracted, her breaths were naturally different from when she was exercising. Being distracted meant that her mind was strong enough, and she was not controlled by the music. Han Shanhua ignored her, and his fingers moved faster and faster on the pipa, and the pitch became higher and higher. Finally, the sound of the guqin outside did not dare to go higher. If it went any higher, the strings might break. Unwillingly it stopped. When the sound of the zither stopped, the tune of the pipa also slowed down and finally came to a stop. Everyone also felt that their feet had finally stepped onto solid ground, and their hearts, which had been hanging high in the air, finally settled back into their chests. Zheng! With the sound of a pipa tearing silk, everyone felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over their heads. They finally woke up completely from the illusion created by the music. They looked at each other, and their faces turned red. They wanted to find a hole to crawl into. These princes, who were usually immaculately dressed and strove for elegance in their every move, were all disheveled at this moment. There were even some who were topless and stripped down to their underwear. Moreover, Their postures were all strange. Some were hugging the legs of the table and trembling, some were lying on the ground with their hands on the snow-white carpet, and some were even hiding under the table and trembling with their hands holding their heads and butts sticking out. The women weren't any better. Although they weren't completely naked, their outer garments and necklines were open. Their hair was loose and messy. Some of them were hugging a pillar, while others were hugging the men beside them. This situation was not the usual chaos and awkwardness. Everyone's faces were red as they hurriedly lowered their heads to tidy up their clothes. Those whose clothes were only disheveled were still okay. They just needed to tidy it up a little. There were also people whose clothes were stained with oil, vegetable stains, or torn by themselves. They couldn't wear them anymore and had to change their clothes. Chapter 393. Because Ji Yunhuang and a small group of people had a high level of cultivation, they were able to withstand the sound of the music. Thus they did not fall too deeply into the illusion. At this moment, other than their pale faces and slightly messy clothes, they were fine. When Ji Yunhuang woke up, he immediately looked at Ning Xuema and was startled. Ning Xuema was still in the arms of Master Han Shangyue. Han Shanyue's arms were wrapped around her and his hands were still on the strings of the pipa. The two people's posture was indescribably intimate. Xuema. Ji Yunhuang could not help but call out to her. Master. Kiran, who was drunk and sleeping, finally jumped up and looked at his master in disbelief. Didn't Master hate this Han Shangyue the most? Why did she allow him to hug her? Kiran's voice was exceptionally sharp and attracted the attention of the people who were preparing themselves. They all opened their eyes and mouths wide. Especially the women. Their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Didn't Master Han Shangyue never get close to any woman? How could it be? How could he hug that jinx so intimately? Furthermore, the title of jinx was bestowed upon her by him. Ning Xuema also came back to her senses and secretly gritted her teeth. Let me go. Her acupuncture point was still sealed. Han Shanyue's eyes dimmed and he decisively let go of her. Ning Xuema staggered for a moment before falling to the ground with a thump. She was forced to dance for such a long time that all the strength in her body was exhausted. When Han Shanyue was hugging her, she did not feel it, but when he let go, she felt that her body was as soft as cotton. That was why she suddenly fell down. She was stunned and could not help but angrily glare at Han Shanyue. Han Shanyue only glanced at her coldly and turned around. Like a wisp of smoke, he flew out of the window. Ji Yunhuang wanted to come over and support her. However, he himself also staggered a little. Just now, they had exhausted all of their strength in that musical duel. Huangge, Luhinti groaned from the side. His appearance was also somewhat disheveled. If he had not been concerned about the image of the emperor, he would have already collapsed under the table. Now he was sitting on the ground and had yet to get up. Ji Yunhuang secretly felt ashamed and hurriedly supported his father, helping him to sit properly on the chair. When he turned back to look at Ning Xuema, she had already gotten up on her own, gritted her teeth and pounced toward the window. She wanted to see which bastard was playing such a wicked zither. Haha, little Xuema, your dance was very nice. I'll come and find you again. She heard an ethereal laugh. The voice was a little hoarse and magnetic, very pleasant to the ears. Ning Xuema stopped in her tracks, and her expression changed drastically. This voice was so familiar. It's that red-clothed freak's voice. How could this be? Wasn't he already kicked into the lake to feed the beasts? Ning Xuema gritted her teeth and pounced on the window. The pavilion they were in was built on the water. It was originally prepared for summer, so there were many windows in the pavilion. Ning Xuema stood there and could see the panoramic view of the outside. Under the moonlight, the lake surrounding the pavilion was like a mirror. She could not see any strange people coming and going. Even Han Shanyue, who had come out of the window, was nowhere to be seen. The others obviously had the same thoughts as her. After they could move, they all ran to the nearest window to look, but they did not see anything. Did the zither player leave? Monday recommendation tickets, monthly tickets. Let's go. Chapter 394. The Royal Garden's security could be said to be the tightest. Who could sneak in so stealthily and almost kill so many people with just one song? If Han Shanyue was not here today and used his pipa to repel the person playing the zither, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lu Hinti's face was gloomy. He immediately ordered his bodyguard to call in the leader of the royal guards who was in charge of security today. A moment later, a fierce general came in with a pale face. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. That person was Shi Tianlong. The moment he came in, he knelt down and begged for forgiveness. Lu Hinti asked him a few questions about the defense and he answered them one by one. There was no problem with his defense and it could be said that there were no blind spots. No one should be able to sneak in. When the zither sounded, Shi Tianlong initially thought that it was the royal family's entertainment program and did not pay much attention to it. When he realized that something was wrong, he and his soldiers were already mesmerized by the sound of the zither. It was only when the two instruments ended that the patrolling guards woke up. When they came over, it was as if they were suffering from a serious illness. They could not even walk properly. Some of the weaker ones had already vomited blood. However, when the zither sounded, Shi Tianlong happened to be patrolling nearby and saw the figure of the person playing the zither. At that time, the person was dressed in red and was sitting on a small boat with a dark blue zither on his lap. At that time, there was a mist on the water, causing the person's figure to be faintly discernible. Other than the black hair and red clothes, Shi Tianlong did not see anything else. Lu Hinti then ordered everyone in the music hall to come over and let Shi Tianlong identify the person. Shi Tianlong looked at them one by one and shook his head with certainty. He is not here. Lu Hinti frowned even more. He then asked the leader of the music hall if there was an outside zither player. The leader was in fear and trepidation, saying that the royal family would definitely not allow an unknown zither player to come in. There were so many people in the royal garden, so many experts, but they did not even see the other person's face clearly and were almost wiped out. Who could this person be? How did he get in? What was his purpose in coming here to play this murderous piece of music? Who was the one who sent them? Would he attack again in the future? Countless questions swirled in everyone's minds, but no one could find an answer. Lu Hinti's face was as dark as iron. Everyone's expression was naturally not good. The person playing the zither was undoubtedly a great danger. It was like a knife hanging over everyone's head, causing everyone's heart to palpitate. People were most afraid of unknown dangers. It's her. It's all her fault. One of the women couldn't help but scream. She pointed a finger at Ning Xuema. It's all her fault. If she hadn't danced that weird dance and played that lousy pipa, she wouldn't have been able to attract that demonic zither sound. This voice seemed to have reminded everyone of something. Everyone's gaze once again gathered on Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema still hadn't changed out of her red dress. Her red dress was like fire, which made the other women jealous. Look, she's wearing red too. It's the same color as that Guqin player. That's right, that's right. This is definitely not a coincidence. That red-clothed Guqin player must have been summoned by her. That's right. Maybe her playing the pipa was a secret signal to attract that demonic red-clothed man. Otherwise, how could there be such a coincidence? Nonsense. Kiran jumped up. Monthly ticket recommendation ticket. Chapter 395. Nonsense. The little Qilin jumped up. There are many people who wear red clothes. My master was forced to play the pipa by you guys. It wasn't like she wanted to play it. How did it become a secret code? You ugly women are all ugly people. You're not as beautiful as my master, so you're jealous and purposely splashing dirty water on her. Despicable. Despicable. Kiran's words were like a cannon that poked a hornet's nest. The other women who were watching the show coldly from the side also became indignant, and their sarcastic remarks became more and more. Look, she even took in a mythological beast. How could it be possible with her ability? Someone must have helped her. Yes, they even signed a blood contract. How could a trash like her sign a blood contract? The person who helped her sign the blood contract must be a heaven-ranked expert. But everyone knows that on this continent, only the ancestor is a heaven-ranked expert. It's impossible for the ancestor to be a heaven-ranked expert because he was in the imperial palace at that time. Then the expert behind this is worth considering. Could it be the one who played the zither in red? A woman's reasoning ability was good, and she immediately analyzed logically. Yes, there must be a demon when things are abnormal. The things happening around her are too abnormal. Your Majesty, there's definitely something wrong with this woman. We must thoroughly investigate. The women spoke one after another, and the spearhead was pointed at Ning Shuama. Lu Hinti frowned when he heard these women's chatter, but after listening to them, his heart was moved. There were indeed many strange things happening around Ning Shuama. It was very abnormal. He remained calm and looked at Ning Shuama. Shuama, do you have anything to say? Ning Shuama had already sobered up, but she really drank too much, and the alcohol made her usually astute mind somewhat unclear. She shook her head and asked, Your Majesty, what do you want me to say? Look, she's talking about you and me when she's talking to Your Majesty. How rude. Someone immediately grabbed Ning Shuama's words. Lu Hinti frowned and waved his hand to make the woman shut up. He looked at Ning Shuama's red face. Although what they said is just speculation, it's quite reasonable. Shuama, I'm not doubting you, but there are too many mysteries around you. First, tell me how you and the mythological beast Qilin established a blood contract? Who was the person who helped you? I can't remember. Ning Shuama's answer. She really couldn't remember. That part of her memory had always been vague. Luxian Emperor frowned even more. How can you not remember such an important matter? Could it be that you really have something to say? Is it really related to that red person? The little Qilin cried out from the side. Hey, Emperor, my master and I really don't remember that matter clearly. My master didn't lie. Lu Hinti's face sank and he faintly said, You probably drank too much, so your mind isn't clear. It's possible that you can't remember. Then you should stay here to sober up before answering me. Guards. 4 imperial guards came in and bowed. Your Majesty, bring Marquis Ning to a suitable place to sober up. Lu Hinti ordered. Ji Yunhuang's complexion slightly changed. He hastily bowed and said, Imperial Father, although the matter of Shuama subduing the little Qilin is somewhat strange, it doesn't mean that the person behind her is that red-clothed zither master. After all, we don't have any real evidence, so if we just punish her like this. Chapter 396. Did I say that I'll punish her? But there's something fishy about her. If we don't find out the truth, the country won't be at peace. That's right, Crown Prince. This woman is too strange. Even if she doesn't have any tricks up her sleeves, she's still a jinx. This disaster might have been caused by her evil aura. This kind of woman not only brings bad luck to her parents, but also to all her relatives. She might even bring disaster to the country. Another woman added fuel to the fire. The 4 guards agreed and immediately came to arrest Ning Shuama. Ning Shuama wanted to laugh. Just based on a few groundless accusations, they wanted to throw her into prison? This old emperor's intelligence was too high. She didn't say anything, but Qilin was already so angry that all its fur stood on end. A blue light flashed on its body and it revealed its original form. It turned into a majestic Qilin beast and stood in front of Ning Shuama. It bared its teeth at the 4 guards. Who dares to arrest my master? Ask if I agree to it first. The guard that Shiju left behind also stood beside Ning Shuama and said coldly, She's someone that my heir wants to protect. I won't sit by and do nothing. The situation in the hall suddenly became tense. Ning Shuama, do you want to rebel? Lu Hinti's voice also became cold. Damn it, she didn't get any benefits in this broken country. She really wanted to rebel. However, she was now in the Imperial Garden and only had Qilin and that guard by her side. With this kind of strength, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to try to break out. But if she didn't rebel and was really thrown into prison this time, she wouldn't be as lucky as last time to successfully escape. Because the old emperor felt that she was endangering his country, he obviously wanted to kill her. She was afraid that even if he had to sacrifice this Qilin, he would kill her to prevent future troubles. So this time she definitely couldn't let them throw her into prison. It seemed like she could only fight to the death. She slowly straightened her body and glanced at the group of guards who had rushed in from outside the main hall. She was about to do something. Shuama, don't be impulsive. Imperial Father won't really make things difficult for you. Ji Yunhuang suddenly walked over with large strides and pushed aside the Imperial guards who were blocking the way. He arrived in front of Ning Shuang. Huang, be careful. Lu Hinti shouted anxiously. Before he could finish speaking, Ning Shuama had already made her move. She pulled out the treasured sword from Ji Yunhuang's waist and pointed it at Ji Yunhuang's neck. Your Highness, I apologize. She actually managed to subdue Ji Yunhuang in a single move. Lu Hinti's expression changed. Ningshuama, are you really going to rebel? Release the crown prince. Ningshuama hid behind Ji Yunhuang's back. The sword in her hand was pointed at the artery on Ji Yunhuang's neck. Your Majesty, it was you who didn't know right from wrong and wanted to kill Shuama. Shuama had no choice but to fight back. Everyone, get out of the way. She steeled her heart and dragged Ji Yunhuang forward. Kirin and the Imperial Guard left behind by Shiju consciously brought up the rear. Since the crown prince was in her hands, the Imperial Guards had no choice but to give way. Ning Shuama, do you know that if you walk out like this, you will become the enemy of the entire empty country? Lu Hinti's voice became even colder. There's no other way. If I don't fight back now, I will be turned into a corpse by your Majesty tomorrow. No matter what, I will still die. Naturally, I have to take a gamble. Ning Shuama was not moved at all. We only want to bring you to a quiet room to sober up. We have no intention of harming you. After all, there are too many mysteries surrounding you. As long as you can tell us who established the blood contract with you, we will not make things difficult for you. Chapter 397. What if Shuama still can't remember? Ning Shuama's voice became even colder. Then your Majesty will definitely use extreme measures against Shuama, right? Ning Shuama sneered. Your Majesty, I can tell you right now. Although I have forgotten who established the blood contract between us, there is one thing that I am certain of. It definitely isn't that red-clothed Guqin player. How can you be so sure? Lu Hinti immediately grasped the main point. Ning Shuama was speechless. Damn it. I must have drunk too much to have actually left such a big loophole. This red-clothed person was released by both her and Kirin. Naturally, he wasn't the one who established the blood contract between her and Kirin. However, she couldn't say this reason. Once she said it, her sin would be even greater. Furthermore, she wasn't sure if the red-clothed Guqin player Shi Tianlong saw was that red-clothed evildoer Shui Lan. Perhaps it was someone else? After all, there were many capable people in this world. She took a deep breath and calmly replied, Shuama is naturally certain. As for the reason, perhaps I will give your Majesty an answer in the future. At this time she had already pushed and shoved Ji Yunhuang to the top of the stairs. The top of the stairs was also filled with imperial bodyguards. They all looked at her with vigilance. Without the Emperor's order, they wouldn't move aside. Your Majesty, Shuama didn't intend to harm the Crown Prince. However, this is on the condition that you don't push me too far. Tell your people to move aside. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that the sword in my hand won't slip. This sentence was full of threat. Lu Hinti didn't dare to risk his beloved son. He could only order all the imperial bodyguards to move aside. Ning Shuama and the others took the opportunity to go downstairs. In front of them was the Crown Prince, and behind them was Kirin and the imperial bodyguard. Naturally, Lu Hinti and the others couldn't do anything. They could only follow them. Ning Shuama quickly arrived at the hall on the first floor. Outside the hall was the 9 winding corridors. As long as she escorted Ji Yunhuang out of this garden and out of the capital, she would be able to escape with Kirin. After all, she was still short, especially when Ji Yunhuang was the tall and straight type. She had to stand on her tiptoes to hold the sword against his neck, which was a bit strenuous. Ji Yunhuang lowered his voice, You're too tired like this. It'll be safer if you place your sword on my back. Ning Shuama simply wanted to slap her own head. This wine really shouldn't be drunk. Her mind was not a little slow. He kept making common-sense mistakes. As expected, she placed the treasured sword on Ji Yunhuang's back and said in a low voice, Many thanks. Ji Yunhuang had purposely walked over to be her hostage. She was very clear about this. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to succeed so easily. It seemed like Ji Yunhuang really treated her well, and was someone she could befriend. Both of their voices were very soft, almost as if they were transmitting their voices through telepathy. When it left his mouth, it only entered her ears. Other people simply couldn't hear what they were talking about. Ning Shuama was also afraid that everyone would be suspicious of Ji Yunhuang. So she deliberately laughed coldly, You want me to let you go? Dream on. No matter what, I'll have to ask you to send me out of the city. She lowered her voice and said to Ji Yunhuang alone, "You're a real man, so I'll befriend you. Previously, you injured me because of Ji Yunyao, so I won't bicker with you anymore." Ji Yunhuang's eyes slightly darkened. He had never wanted to be her friend under Lu Hinti's command. The imperial bodyguards who were blocking the entrance moved aside. Ning Xuema took large strides forward while escorting Ji Yunhuang. Chapter 398. Ning Xuema took large strides forward with Ji Yunhuang in tow. She secretly let out a sigh of relief. It seemed like she had made the right move. She had a chance to escape. Just as she was about to let out a sigh of relief, a light green figure flashed in front of her. Before she could react, she felt her wrist go numb. The sword fell to the ground with a clang. Immediately after, her waist went numb as well. Her entire body was frozen in place, unable to move. "Your Highness, get out of the way!" Someone among the guards shouted. Two people jumped out and pulled Ji Yunhuang away, protecting him in the middle of the group of guards. Ji Yunhuang clenched his fists in his sleeves. At this time, he could not use his sword as a hostage. He could only endure and observe the situation. A large number of imperial bodyguards surrounded Ning Xuema and the others. Countless swords and sabers were unsheathed, forming a mountain of swords and sabers around Ning Xuema. As long as she made the slightest move, she would be cut into pieces. Ning Xuema was unable to make any movements. Her body was completely frozen. Only her eyes and neck could move. At this time, her gaze was fixed on a person. That person was standing at the entrance of the hall, blocking her only way of escape. Did she really have a deep hatred for this person? Why did he keep plotting against a girl? Lu Hinti's eyes lit up when he saw this person. Master Han. That person was Han Shangyue. His face was still hidden in the shadows, so no one could see it clearly. They could only see the sky-blue robe on his body fluttering in the wind. He nodded slightly. "Master Han, did you catch the red-clothed zither-playing assassin?" Lu Hinti asked. "He escaped." Han Shanyue's answer was very simple. Lu Hinti immediately frowned. That assassin's martial arts were unprecedentedly high. If he escaped now, what would happen if he came back again? The others were also trembling with fear. It was obvious that they were thinking the same thing as Lu Hinti. "Then do you know where that person came from?" "Not human." Lu Hinti and the others were even more shocked as they looked at each other. They naturally knew that there were demons in this world, but they had not seen much of them, especially such a powerful and abnormal demon. Lu Hinti's gaze then shifted to Ning Xuema. The more he looked at her, the stranger he found her. Someone behind him couldn't help but say, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid the current Miss Ning is also a demon. She had changed so much in the past month. Previously, she was very cowardly and didn't have much ability. Now that she had so many strange abilities, her appearance had also changed. She was no longer like her. Was she possessed by a demon? He's in cahoots with that red-clothed zither player, and they're here to cause trouble for our vast sky nation." These words were echoed by many people. A few people knew the former Ning Xuema, and they all pointed out the differences between the current Ning Xuema and the former Ning Xuema. Everyone's mouth was gold, especially at this time. Lu Hinti looked at Ning Xuema with an even colder gaze. "Ning Xuema, what else do you have to say?" At this time, no matter what Ning Xuema said, it would be superfluous. She smiled coldly. "If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. Your Majesty wants to convict Xuema based on some baseless conjectures? If Xuema was really a demon, why would she risk her life to save the crown prince? If Xuema was really a demon, then I had countless opportunities to assassinate your Majesty recently, so why didn't I do it? If I was really a demon, why didn't I start a massacre just now?" Chapter 399. Father, Xuema is definitely not a demon. She is truly Marquis Ning's daughter. It can't be wrong. Ji Yunhuang also spoke up. "Yunhuang, how can you be so sure? You should know that demons with high cultivation don't have any demonic aura. If she isn't a demon, then what's with the abnormalities on her body? She can't even say who helped her establish a blood contract with Kirin." "Father, Xuema has already said that she recently received a gift from the heavens. Perhaps there really was an expert who guided her and changed her. Moreover, she really didn't do anything to harm Chongkong country. As for the blood contract, perhaps she really can't remember it. Perhaps the expert who established the blood contract for them deliberately erased her memory. It may not be that Shuama deliberately didn't say it. Father, Shuama is Marquis Ning's daughter after all. Recently, she has also made contributions to Chongkong country. If it wasn't for her, I would have already lost my life. Father, if you use some groundless accusations to convict her, I'm afraid it will make the other loyal officials bitterly disappointed. Lu Hinti's eyes darkened. Huang let's not talk about other crimes. Just the fact that she took you as a hostage just now is a great crime worthy of 9 familial exterminations. Ji Yunhuang steeled his heart. Father, I volunteered to be her hostage just now. It has nothing to do with her. Here, no one spoke up for Ning Shuama. If he didn't plead for her, she would really die. Lu Hinti actually had this suspicion long ago, but he didn't think that his son would have such deep feelings for Ning Shuama. In order to protect her, he actually admitted it in front of everyone. Did he know that with just this sentence, the imperial censors in the imperial court would be able to use it against him and strip him of his position as the crown prince? Was this brat crazy? Lu Hinti's face was as heavy as iron. Nonsense. His gaze once again fell on Ning Shuama. He increasingly felt that she was a perfect example of a jinx, a femme fatale. If she was allowed to continue living, her most outstanding and proud son would really be destroyed in her hands. Take Ning Shuama down first and have the 3 departments interrogate her. If her innocence is proven, we will release her, Lu Hinti instructed. He had already made up his mind to kill Ning Shuama. It was better to get rid of such a troublemaker as soon as possible, to eliminate all future troubles. Imperial father. Ji Yunhuang still wanted to say something. My decision has been made. There's no need to speak anymore. Luxian Emperor waved his hand and ordered the imperial bodyguards to arrest Ning Shuama. Ning Shuama sneered and closed her eyes. Kiran's eyes were red with anger. It and the guard left behind by Shiju stood in front of Ning Shuama, one on the left and one on the right. Whoever dares to touch my master, I will fight them to the death. Kiran bared its fangs and roared. She is someone my master wants to protect. Whoever captures her will be going against my master. That guard also said coldly. Everyone was afraid of breaking the vases. No one was willing to offend the wise king family. If the wise king insisted on protecting Ning Shuama, they really wouldn't dare to make a move. After looking at each other, their gazes turned to Lu Hinti. Lu Hinti's face became even darker. Guardxia, she is a person of my Chongkong Empire. Moreover, she is of great importance. You definitely can't let her go. I'm sorry for today. In the future, we will naturally give your master an explanation. He waved his hand at the imperial guards. The scales on Kiran's body had already exploded. Its eyes were wide open, and it already had the intention to fight to the death. The atmosphere in the hall became tense. A bloody battle was about to break out. Your Majesty, I agree to your conditions. Chapter 400. Your Majesty, I agree to your conditions. Han Shangyue, who had been sitting on the wall, suddenly opened his mouth. Lu Hinti was stunned. When he realized what he heard, he was overjoyed. Even his eyes lit up. That's great. Thank you, sir. No, it's heavenly master. I will prepare everything for you. He was so happy that he started to speak incoherently. Han Shangyue was someone that all the countries wanted to rope in. Who knew how many monarchs had offered him amazing conditions to recruit him as a heavenly master, but they were all rejected by him. This time when he came to Chongkong country, Lu Hinti had been thinking of ways to make him stay, but he had no intention of agreeing. Although Lu Hinti felt regretful, he could not do anything about it. Everyone said that Han Shanyue's martial arts were unpredictable. Everyone had only heard of it before, but now they finally saw it for themselves. If not for him today, he and the ministers would have been wiped out by the red-clothed zither master. Now that he thought about it, he still felt a lingering fear. What's more, that red-clothed zither player had run away. Who knew if he would return? Luxian Emperor was originally very worried about this hidden danger, but now all of his worries were swept away. As long as Han Shangyue stayed here, why would he be afraid of the red-clothed zither master? However, I also have a condition. Han Shangyue spat out another sentence. Sir, please state your conditions. I will agree. Han Shangyue finally looked at Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema only felt the hair on her back stand up. She glared at him hatefully. Ning Xuema, do you hate me? Han Shangyue finally opened his mouth. Ning Xuema sneered and did not speak. Was there a need to answer? She now had the heart to tear him into pieces. Her attitude caused the corners of Han Shangyue's mouth to curl up slightly. He then proposed an outrageous condition to Emperor Luxian. Your Majesty, I lack a concubine who can grind ink and serve tea. I think she's not bad. I beg your Majesty to give her to me. Luhin tea. Everyone. This was the expression one would get if they were struck by lightning. Ning Xuema also opened her eyes wide and looked at Han Shangyue as if he was crazy. Luhin Ti calmed himself down and said, Sir, didn't you say that she's a jinx and is destined to jinx her husband? What's wrong? My life is tougher than hers. Han Shangyue answered indifferently. It meant that his life was tougher than hers, so he wasn't afraid of death. Luhin Ti regained his composure. Sir, it's not that I don't want to agree. I'm just curious. With your character and status, what kind of woman can't you have? Why must she be a cursed loner? It would be bad if she were to jinx her master. Mister, why don't you reconsider other women? His gaze swept across the women present. We believe that no matter who you choose, she will be extremely happy. These words were not false at all. No matter if it was in terms of talent or status, Han Shangyue was every girl's dream lover. Not to mention being his concubines, even if he asked them to warm his bed, they would be more than happy to do so. All the women present immediately stepped forward, intentionally or otherwise, to make themselves more conspicuous. Han Shangyue did not see their interest at all. He only said, I have high aspirations. I don't like ordinary women and I don't want to jinx them. The faces of the women present turned pale and they shrank back. Luhin Ti was slightly embarrassed. But, Han Shangyue glanced at him indifferently. Your Majesty, don't worry. Although my life is tough, it will only jinx my wife and not others. Chapter 401. Han Shangyue looked at Ning Xuema and said, I might be able to defeat her. Everyone was speechless. Luhin Ti said, This, Your Majesty, if you can't even agree to such a small request. Han Shangyue's voice turned cold. This requires my consent, right? Luhin Ti struggled to say. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. If not for the ancestor saying that Ning Xuema was a 1,000-year loner, he would have thought that Han Shangyue had ulterior motives when he said that Ning Xuema was a heavenly calamity loner. Everyone's eyes were on Ning Xuema. There was envy, jealousy, and surprise in their eyes. They all felt that Ning Xuema would definitely agree. After all, this was her only chance to escape today. Ning Xuema felt that Han Shangyue's head must have been kicked by a donkey. Otherwise, he must be mentally ill. At this time, she was still feeling tipsy. Alcohol could easily make people lose their cool, so she simply replied, I won't marry a lunatic. Don't talk about making her a concubine. Even if this person used a palanquin to marry her, she still wouldn't marry him. Luhin Ti sighed in relief. Today, he had completely offended Ning Xuema, so he would rather destroy her than let her stay by Han Shangyue's side. Mr. Han, you see, she herself doesn't agree. Han Shangyue glanced at Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema stared at him coldly. It was unknown whether it was because of anger or the alcohol, but her face was red. She hasn't sobered up yet. I believe that she will give me the answer I want tomorrow. Han Shangyue said calmly. Luhin Ti frowned. If she doesn't agree tomorrow, I believe that Your Majesty will have a way to make her agree. Han Shangyue's voice became more leisurely. If I don't get a satisfactory answer tomorrow, I will have to ask Your Majesty to find someone else. After saying this, he turned and left. Just as he walked out of the door, he turned back. What I want tomorrow is a concubine who is nimble, efficient, and intelligent. I believe that Your Majesty will not disappoint me. His sleeves fluttered as he left. Luhin Ti. In this special period of time, he couldn't offend this Mr. Han Shangyue, so he could only follow his request. His gaze landed on Ning Xuema's body. This time he really had a headache. How could he convince her? She couldn't do that. She wouldn't be nimble and efficient tomorrow therefore. He could only convince her. However, looking at Ning Xuema's stubborn appearance, it seemed like she would not be easy to convince. Moreover, this girl's eloquence was not ordinary. She had the ability to battle a group of scholars with words. He was afraid that even if he tied up all the imperial censors under his command, they would not be her match. Moreover, he had thoroughly offended her. What a headache! He waved his hand. Find a clean room for Miss Ning to rest. We'll talk about it tomorrow. This time he couldn't let the guards arrest Ning Xuema. Of course he couldn't put her in jail. Instead, he let the maids help her to a clean room to sober up. Ning Xuema's acupuncture points had not been unsealed yet, so she couldn't struggle. When the guards saw that her life was no longer in danger, they were relieved and let the maids help Ning Xuema. Kiran wanted to stop them, but Ning Xuema used telepathy to stop it. Chapter 402. Before she agreed, Lu Hinti would not let her go and would only put her under house arrest. Moreover, she was exhausted, so it was better for her to rest for a night. Xuema made up her mind. Ji Yunhuang clenched his fists tightly and his handsome face turned green. Naturally, he did not want Ning Xuema to marry someone else, not to mention a concubine. But in the current situation, he could not give her any promises. He only hated that he was not strong enough. He turned around and left. Huang, where are you going? Lu Hinti felt that his son's expression was not right. Ji Yunhuang did not say anything and did not even look back. He just walked away with large strides. Lu Hinti. Although this son of his was always cold, it was the first time he left in a huff. A lively garden party ended so miserably. Everyone tactfully said their goodbyes and left. In a rather luxurious palace, there were heavy guards outside the palace. Even a fly would not be able to enter and leave as it pleased. Ning Xuema was lazily lying on the bed, half leaning on the bedpost. Her eyes were closed and she seemed to be asleep. The little Qilin still turned into a blue cat and curled up at her feet. It curled up into a ball and fell into a deep sleep. The curtains of the bed had already been pulled down. Outside the curtains knelt an eloquent imperial censor. He had already knelt there for more than half an hour, spittle flying everywhere as he spoke. In the end, Ning Xuema didn't even feel like replying to him, not to mention agreeing to that condition. This girl had clearly drunk the hangover soup and was awake, but she did not respond to him. This was already the third imperial censor called by the emperor. The first two had left with their tails between their legs. This imperial censor, who was known to be able to bring a dead person back to life, had been nagging for half a day. He had said all the good and bad things, but there was still no effect. He could only leave with his tail between his legs. Lu Hinti obviously wanted to use the human wave tactic. When one person came out, another immediately went in. Just like that, the imperial censors changed 7 or 8 times in a row, each of them nearly breaking their lips from talking, but Ning Xuema just didn't say anything. He just sat there with his eyes closed and didn't even have the intention to open them. Although they could threaten Ning Xuema from all sides, they didn't dare to do anything to her. One by one, they came in high spirits but returned dejectedly. Lu Hinti was waiting in a side hall nearby. However, as the imperial censors returned one by one, his heart sank. He had never met anyone as difficult to deal with as Ning Xuema. A 13-year-old girl was actually unmoved by force or persuasion. It seemed like she was certain that he wouldn't dare to torture her. Damn it. He really didn't dare. This was the first time Lu Hinti had encountered such a difficult bone to chew. He paced around in the side chamber. The eunuchs around him wanted to persuade him to rest, but they were all yelled at by him. Han Shangyue gave him a deadline of tomorrow morning, so he really didn't have much time left. He originally wanted to find Ji Yunhuang, who had a good relationship with Ning Xuema, to persuade her, but the eunuch who sent the message came back and reported that they couldn't find the crown prince's whereabouts. No one knew where he went. The people who went to search for the red-clothed zither player also didn't have any news. It was obvious that they hadn't found his whereabouts yet. Just because he didn't appear didn't mean that he had left. Lu Hinti didn't dare to take this risk. In the end, all the imperial censors were defeated by Ning Xuema. Even the Supreme Court official Lan Yufeng didn't have any effect. Chapter 403. With no other choice, Lu Hinti gritted his teeth and decided to do it himself. In order to keep a talent like Han Shangyue, he was willing to give it his all. Ning Shuama was really tired, so she was only half awake and half asleep. Those words of the imperial censor were all in one ear and the other out the other. She simply did not take them to heart. She was actually thinking about what she should do after she sobered up. If she didn't agree, she wouldn't be able to keep her life. Han Shangyue, that pervert, was very domineering with his acupuncture points. Although she could move freely now, she didn't have much strength left. She could only sit like an ordinary person and couldn't use any power. The guard sent by Shiju saw that her life wasn't in danger, and left in the middle of the night. He must have gone to report to his master. As for Kirin, with its current ability, it couldn't carry her out of the heavily guarded palace unscathed. Moreover, even if she was lucky enough to escape, what about the people in the Ning residence? They would probably become cannon fodder. Concubine. Concubine. Was she destined to be a concubine in this life? The sixth prince wanted her to be a concubine, the old emperor wanted her to be a beast concubine, and even that red-clothed evildoer wanted her to be a concubine. Crown Prince Ji Yunhuang was indeed interested in her, but she couldn't be his official concubine. As for Shiju, that child looked cold on the surface but was actually very passionate. He was really good to her and was willing to do anything for her. However, he was after all the wise king's son. Even if she was interested in him, she wouldn't be able to get past his family. After all, no one dared to take the risk and let a heavenly cursed loner marry into their family. Ning Shuama silently thought about all the suitors in this era. None of them actually wanted to marry her as their official concubine. She couldn't help but feel sad. She touched her nose and sighed softly. She lowered her head and looked at her own body. Was this the fate of a heavenly beauty? She was only 13 years old and was already being forced to marry Han Shangyue. That pervert, what did he think of her? Why did he do this? She thought about Han Shanyue's feelings but still couldn't figure it out. She decided not to think about it anymore. As dawn approached, Lu Hinti finally arrived. A eunuch shouted at the door, "Long live the emperor has arrived." His voice was loud enough, but Ning Shuama didn't give him any face at all. She didn't even have the intention to get up, let alone kneel to greet him. The old emperor stood at the door for a moment, waved his hand in a pretentious gesture, and then walked in. He found himself a chair and sat down, preparing to have a long talk. The maid serving at the side hung up the bed curtain. The emperor was here, so it was obviously inappropriate to hang up the bed curtain. Lu Hinti looked at Ning Shuama, who was still lying under the quilt. It was simply impossible. He went straight to the point. "Ning Shuama, you should know that you have to agree to this, even if you don't want to. What conditions do you have? Just state them." Ning Shuama said indifferently, "I don't have any conditions. I'd rather die than marry that pervert." This was the first time someone called Master Han Shangyue a pervert. Lu Hinti said coldly, "It doesn't matter if you're not afraid of death. Aren't you afraid that your entire Ning family will be executed? Your Majesty, go ahead and execute them. It's best if you kill all 9 generations of my family." Ning Shuamo replied indifferently. The Ning family had nothing to do with her at all. "Monthly tickets, recommendation tickets, do you want them in my pocket?" Chapter 404. Lucian Emperor was choked by her words for a moment. He could only find a way out of this embarrassing situation. "Your father, Marquis Jingyuan, has made great contributions to the vast Sky Empire. Because of his face, we will not be so ruthless. However, your stubbornness really disappoints me. We won't kill your entire family, but that old Zhong was the one who raised you, so it's unavoidable that he wasn't strict enough in teaching you. If you don't agree, we can only kill him." When he said the last sentence, there was a murderous look in his eyes. Ning Shuama did not buy it. "I have never heard of a servant being able to control his master. However, if your Majesty wants to use him to threaten Shuama, Shuama does not care. I don't even care about my own life. Why would I care about other people's lives?" Lu Hinti said, "Ning Shuama, if you do not agree, only death awaits you." And the left assistant minister who just left also said that. Shuama said that she does not care. "Ning Shuama, even ants cherish their lives, not to mention you. You are only 13 years old. There is still a great future waiting for you. An imperial censor may also said that just now. Ning Shuama's voice was still indifferent. How is Master Han not good enough? You don't know how many girls in this world want to marry him, but he has never looked at them. You being able to marry him is a great blessing. I will give this blessing to others. Whoever wants to marry can marry, Shuama does not care. This girl was simply too stubborn. The veins on Lu Hinti's forehead were throbbing. He used both the carrot and the stick to persuade her for an hour, but Ning Shuama only replied with a few words. In the end, Lu Hinti was about to lose all hope. If he could not take down Ning Shuama, he could not keep Han Shangyue. If he could not keep Han Shangyue, there would be no one to deal with that mysterious red-clothed zither player. His country and even his life would be in danger. That Han Shangyue had simply given him a super difficult problem to solve. In the end, he had no choice but to send everyone out. Afterwards, he lowered his voice and bowed to Ning Shuama. Great aunt, in the end, what do you want? Tell me and I will agree. You are also a citizen of Vast Sky Empire, and your father has been loyal all his life. You can't just watch Vast Sky Empire citizens fall into a dangerous situation, right? Ning Shuama glanced at him and pursed her lips. What does it matter if they are loyal subjects? Isn't His Majesty going to kill a loyal descendant for a groundless crime? I didn't want to kill you, but I have truly let you down. Emperor Luxian still spoke in a low voice. You think a simple sorry is enough? What do you want? His Majesty Marquis Marquis Martyrs Martyr Martyrs Martyr 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 Martyrs Martyr 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 Martyr. Was she willing to raise her conditions? Did she relent? Lu Hinti was secretly happy. He nodded and agreed. Good, as long as you agree to marry Master Han as a concubine, I will agree to your condition. Ning Shuama narrowed her eyes and slowly said, Your Majesty, this is what you should do. It is not Shuama's condition. However, Shuama can agree to consider this. Lu Hinti. He could only bargain with Ning Shuama again. Lu Hinti realized that once this little girl was awake, her words were watertight. She was also a good negotiator. During the negotiations, Luxian Emperor had unknowingly agreed to a bunch of conditions that made him regret it so much that his intestines turned green. Chapter 405. For example, giving Ning Shuama a permanent death exemption medallion and a reward of 100,000 taels of gold to the Marquis Jingyuan's residence. No matter when or where, she would not need to pay respects to any member of the royal family. Even if she met the emperor, she would not need to kneel. She would renovate the Marquis Jingyuan's residence and double its size. She would set up a horse memorial arch and a horse memorial arch in front of the Marquis Jingyuan's residence. As long as they passed by her residence, the civil officials would get off their palanquins and the military officials would get off their horses. Furthermore, she would be able to borrow all kinds of books from the imperial palace. The most important condition was that she would be given the Moonlight Cauldron, a medicine furnace from the treasure pavilion of the imperial palace. The other conditions were still acceptable. Lu Hinti gritted his teeth and agreed to all of them. Only the last condition was not worth it. The Moonlight Cauldron was passed down by his ancestors. It was said that it could refine all kinds of medicine and even the elixir of immortality. Of course, this was just a rumor passed down and no one had confirmed it yet. This was because the structure of the Moonlight Cauldron was not ordinary, and there seemed to be a seal on it. Chong Kong country's best pharmacist was unable to unlock its functions, and could not even use it to refine ordinary medicine. However, this did not mean that the Moonlight Cauldron was not a treasure. This cauldron was kept in the imperial palace and not many people in the world knew about it. Lu Hinti did not understand how Ning Shuama found out that the cauldron was with him. Could it be that Ji Yunhuang told her? Although Lu Hinti was not willing to part with it, he had no choice but to give it to her at this time. In the end, Ning Shuama finally relented. She said that she could consider marrying Han Shangyue, but the precondition was that she had to talk with him again. After talking for a while, she would decide whether to marry him or not. Luxian Emperor simply wanted to cry. He had agreed to so many humiliating conditions, but in the end, he only managed to get an ambiguous answer from her. However, it was good that she relented. This was a good sign. Everything would wait until Han Shangyue arrived. He was actually quite curious about what Ning Shuama would discuss with Han Shangyue. What would Han Shangyue agree to? When the morning sun finally rose, the sky was bright red. Han Shangyue finally floated over. No one knew where he had spent the night. Lu Hinti had secretly sent people to search for him, but to no avail. He seemed to have suddenly appeared outside the garden, and then leisurely went to see Lu Hinti under the guidance of a young eunuch. Lu Hinti naturally told him how difficult it was to convince Ning Shuama. Finally, he told him about Ning Shuama's condition. She wanted to see him before agreeing. Han Shangyue had been quietly listening. When Emperor Lu Xian finished speaking, he slightly nodded his head and opened his golden mouth. Then your majesty can prepare for this heavenly teacher's wedding. Lu Hinti was a little stunned. Sir, no, heavenly master, didn't you want to take her as your concubine? Normally, when a concubine is taken in, a small sedan chair will carry the concubine into the mansion. Han Shangyue glanced at him indifferently. Am I a normal person? This sentence made Lu Hinti choke. Fine, a wedding is a wedding. He didn't mind holding a wedding for someone else. What kind of wedding does Heavenly Master want? Just a little. Let's hold it as the grandest wedding in Chongkong country. Han Shangyue indicated that he was easy to talk to. Lu Hinti was speechless. He didn't sleep the whole night. He already had a headache, but now he felt it was even more painful. Chapter 406. Heavenly Master. Did you see the whereabouts of that demonic zither player yesterday? This was what Lu Hinti was most worried about. Don't worry. Han Shangyue was like a charlatan, only replying with these two words. He turned around and walked out. Let her come to the lakeside to see me. His sleeves fluttered as he walked out of the hall. Lu Hinti. He suddenly felt that this Master Han Shanyue's way of doing things was a bit similar to this continent's most mysterious overlord. He shook his head again, thinking that it was impossible. Not long ago, he received news that the overlord had gone to Bohai and was currently a guest there. It was impossible for him to split himself and come here. Furthermore, this Master Han Shanyue had been famous for a long time. He and the overlord often appeared in different places. There was no place where their whereabouts intersected. He thought too much. The original white cobblestones sparkled like jade under the sunlight. There were weeping willows by the lakeside. Although it was already autumn, the willow leaves were still green, showing no signs of withering. When Ning Shuama came to the lakeside, Yun Yuan saw Master Han Shanyue standing under the weeping willow. Today he had changed his robes again. This time it was a crescent white. The wide robes fluttered gently in the wind, and the dark patterns on the sleeves and lapels flowed like water waves. This time his robes were painted with a picture of bamboo. The leaves and branches danced, setting off the crescent white background. It was a picture of cold bamboo under the moonlight. Coupled with the flowing dark patterns, it gave people a feeling of alienation, like an immortal, untainted by the mortal world. It was quite compatible with his temperament. He stood there twirling a snow-white flute in his hand, creating a pleasing scene. Even if this person's face could not be seen clearly, his demeanor and figure were enough to cause the fall of a city. Wherever he went, he would become the focus of attention. From time to time, there were women's figures appearing and disappearing in the shadows of the flowers and trees. They seemed to be trimming the flowers and clearing the weeds, but their eyes could not help but wander to that figure. Even more so that bold, almost unable to look away. If it wasn't for Lu Hinti's order that no one was to disturb this Mr. Han Shanyue, there would probably be someone who would deliberately pass by, and occasionally pretend to trip and fall into his arms to have a romantic encounter. Ning Shuama stood not far away and looked at him for a moment. He shook his head inwardly. This person was truly a monster. Her elegant temperament was so cold. He was obviously someone she hated to the extreme, but when she saw him for the first time, her heart skipped a beat. However, the man in her heart was still a tough guy like Stallone. Towards handsome men like Han Shanyue, at most, she would just admire them. No, she didn't even have the intention to admire him right now. The only thing she wanted to do now was to kick him into the lake. Let him have a taste of the helplessness of being drowned. Have you seen enough? Han Shanyue suddenly turned around and stared at her with a pair of cold eyes. Ning Shuama felt a chill in her heart from his stare. She vaguely felt that his gaze was somewhat familiar. She curled her lips and walked over. Your Excellency really knows how to find a place. Logically speaking, this was a good place for a date under the moonlight. Unfortunately, she was traumatized by this place and could not find any romantic feelings. Han Shanyue's voice was faint. It's quieter here. There are less vulgar things. Just to chat. He had to find a place that was out of this world. This person was indeed pretentious to a certain extent. Chapter 407. Ning Xuema was too lazy to beat around the bush with him. Why must it be me? This was something she could not figure out. Because you hate me. Han Shanyue answered every question. What kind of strange argument was this? Did he want to keep an enemy by his side? Was he not afraid that she would hate him so much that she would stab him in the middle of the night? Ning Xuema looked at him as if she was looking at a freak. Can you explain in detail? I think that with your qualifications, it would not be difficult for you to take in a concubine who likes you. My life is hard. I would feel less guilty if I jinxed you to death. Ning Xuema clenched her fists in her sleeves and said coldly, Didn't you say that I am a jinx? As far as I know, a jinx will not die, but jinxes others to death. Well, let's wait and see. Han Shanyue's tone was indifferent. You are not afraid that I will kill you to prevent you from jinxing me to death? Han Shanyue's gaze finally turned to her. I look forward to your ability. His tone was so casual that Ning Xuema wanted to kick him into the lake. I am only 13 years old this year. I am still a child. Do you not feel guilty about marrying me? If this was in the modern world, she could simply sue him for molesting a young girl and send him to prison. No. Han Shanyue answered honestly. Ning Xuema inwardly took a deep breath. I feel that since your excellency is also a heavenly calamity star, you shouldn't go and harm other girls. Actually, being single is also quite free and unrestrained. Your excellency is also a free cloud and a wild crane, so why must you be implicated by a family? A concubine is not considered a family. Han Shanyue corrected her. His tone was still indifferent. You only need to answer me, are you willing or not? So what if I am, and so what if I am not? Ning Xuema asked him back. If you are willing, I will marry you in 10 days. If you are not willing, only death awaits you. Ning Xuema's eyes flashed slightly. She knew that he was telling the truth. If she really didn't agree, what awaited her was only endless pursuit. Moreover, her cultivation hadn't recovered yet. If she didn't agree, only death awaited her. If she agreed now, she would have to wait for 10 days. 10 days was enough for her to plan something. She might as well agree first. Okay, I promise you. This time, Ning Xuema answered without hesitation. Just as she finished her sentence, a bright light suddenly flashed in the originally clear sky, and a dazzling flower burst open in front of her eyes. Ning Xuema didn't even have time to dodge before she felt something like an electric current enter between her eyebrows. Her entire body trembled, and she was instantly unable to move. It's over. She was struck by lightning. This was Ning Xuema's first reaction. How could there be a ball of lightning in broad daylight? Strange, why didn't she hear the sound of thunder? In front of her was a dazzling white light. She couldn't see anything. Her head was dizzy, as if she was floating in mid-air. Could she have been struck to death? Was this the way to the netherworld? Ning Xuema tried to take a step forward, but suddenly, she felt as if she had stepped on air, and her body fell straight down. She subconsciously grabbed with her hands and finally, she caught something soft with a touch of warmth. She felt as if she had caught a life-saving straw, and she desperately held on to it. The thing she was hugging slightly stiffened, and a cold voice seemed to come from the sky. Let go. Ning Xuema's body heated up, and her feet seemed to have finally stepped on solid ground. She opened her eyes and then she was embarrassed. Chapter 408. At this moment, she was hugging Han Shanyue's waist like an octopus, and her head was even buried in his chest. No matter how thick-skinned Ning Xuema was, she couldn't help but blush. She quickly let go of her hands and took 2 big steps back. How could I? Han Shanyue's gaze fell on Ning Xuema's face. After knowing her for so long, this was the first time he saw her blush. Her snow-white cheeks seemed to be dyed with a blush, and under the sunlight it was shockingly beautiful. His eyes darkened slightly, And he turned his eyes away, saying lightly, "All right." He turned around and left. All right? What's all right? Although Ning Shuima was smart, she couldn't understand his words, and could only watch as he walked away. What was going on just now? Would this person die if he said a few more words? Ning Shuima's forehead was still burning. She raised her hand and rubbed it, but she didn't feel any damage. She looked up at the sky, and there were a few white clouds floating in the sky. The sun was hanging there and it made her feel warm. There were no dark clouds in sight. Was it a ball of lightning that struck her? Why would there be a sudden flash of lightning on such a clear day? She rubbed her forehead again, and at this time, the burning sensation on her forehead had disappeared. It was slightly warm, but not uncomfortable. It was often said that wherever a ball of lightning struck, there would be no survivors. She didn't expect that she could survive without any injuries. It was really a miracle. She was about to go to the lakeside to see if there was anything wrong with her body when suddenly, there was a sneer from not far away. "You finally got your wish fulfilled, aren't you feeling proud? Are you so happy that you've turned silly?" These words were too harsh, and Ning Shuima frowned and turned around to look. A lady in purple stood beside a bush of bamboo, and beside her were two young girls. Jiuniao. The two girls beside her were the young ladies from last night's banquet. Although Ning Shuima couldn't remember their names, she still had an impression of their faces. Ning Shuima hadn't seen Jiuniao for more than a month, and thought that she had finally learned her lesson. She didn't expect her to still be like this, taking every opportunity to ridicule and suppress her. Ning Shuima smiled lightly, and deliberately looked at Ji Yunyao's face. "Not bad. The injury on Princess Ji's face has finally healed. If I didn't look carefully, I wouldn't have noticed." Ji Yunyao had already been demoted to a princess, but it was only a demotion in rank. She had not been expelled from the imperial city. Her face had been slapped quite badly. At that time it was swollen like a pig's head. She had to recuperate in her residence for a whole month and use countless elixirs to recover. As the saying goes, hit the snake where it hurts. Ning Shuima's words were like a heavy blow to her weak spot, causing her face to instantly turn red. Unfortunately, she couldn't refute Ning Shuima's words. She also did not dare to make a scene and beat up Ning Shuima. Otherwise she would be beaten up by her instead of hitting her. She paused and sneered, "What are you so proud of? You're only married to him as a concubine. You're not even Lady Ru. He's only using you as a pastime." Ning Shuima took a step forward. "Are you jealous?" Ji Yunyao had suffered so many losses from Ning Shuima, so she was actually a bit afraid of her. Seeing her suddenly take a step forward, she subconsciously took 2 steps back. "Nonsense, this consort won't be jealous. This consort doesn't like him." Then who do you like?" Ning Shuima didn't bat an eyelid, and took another step forward. Chapter 409. At this moment, Ning Shuima's aura was extremely strong. Ji Yunyao's heart trembled again. She took 2 more steps back. "Why do you care who I like?" Ji Yunyao cursed in her heart. Who was the one who said that Ning Shuima had lost her martial arts? How could she have such strange movements and aura after losing her martial arts? What she didn't know was that Ning Shuima had indeed lost her martial arts. However, she knew a kind of footwork that was comparable to the wave-like subtle steps in Jin Yong's novel. Even if she didn't have any internal energy, she could still use it as she wished. The biggest characteristic of this kind of footwork was its speed. Moreover, it was very easy to make people dizzy. Ji Yunyao was once bitten by a snake twice shy. Shocked by her movements, she couldn't help but take a few steps back. "Where is His Highness the Crown Prince?" Ning Shuima suddenly asked. Ji Yunyao's heart skipped a beat. She blurted out, "How would I know?" His voice was laced with resentment and anger. When Ji Yunhuang was sick, she secretly went to see him a few times. However, he was always indifferent to her, which made her feel very frustrated. After Ji Yunhuang got better, he didn't go to her residence to see her even once. She already had a guilty conscience. After shouting that sentence, she angrily added, "What do you mean by asking this?" "What do I mean?" Ning Shuima took 2 more steps forward. "What do you think?" "How would I know?" Ji Yunyao was forced to retreat again. Before she could finish her sentence, she suddenly lost her footing. With a scream, she fell into the water. Almost at the same time, someone shouted, "Princess, Be careful. Her words were obviously too late. Ji Yunyao had already fallen into the water. Ning Shuima glanced back at the woman. She was a beauty. Moreover, she looked as gentle as water. Ning Shuima finally remembered her name. Gu Xiaoqi. It sounded like a rather ordinary name. There wasn't much culture to it. However, Ning Shuima knew that she was a talented woman. She had good calligraphy skills. At the banquet, he had waved his brush on the spot and won the praise of everyone present. This woman always looked indifferent. When Ning Shuima was being mocked by everyone in the hall, she didn't say a word. Ning Shuima didn't have a bad impression of her. But she didn't expect that she would be with Ji Yunyao. However, it seemed that her relationship with Ji Yunyao was not as good as it seemed on the surface. She only reminded Ji Yunyao when she was about to fall. Princess, princess, are you all right? Someone come. The princess fell into the water. Gu Xiaoqi began to shout. Don't shout. Ji Yunyao knew how to swim, but her swimming ability was obviously average. She was trying her best to paddle to the shore. When she heard Gu Xiaoqi shouting, she quickly stopped her. There were many palace guards patrolling nearby. If they heard that the princess had fallen into the water, they would definitely rush over and see her in such a sorry state. However, although Gu Xiaoqi looked like a gentle girl, her voice was not soft. Her shouts had already alerted many people. It was not a small matter that the princess had fallen into the water. After a short while, a large group of people ran over and saw Ji Yunyao crawling out of the lake. At this time, Ji Yunyao was in a very sorry state. Her hair was dripping with water and her dress was sticking to her body, revealing her figure. Ji Yunyao was also a beauty. However, her chest was slightly small and her legs were a little thick. Usually, when she wore a fluttering dress, nothing could be seen. Now, all the shortcomings of her figure were exposed. Chapter 4:10. This princess was usually very prideful. But now she was like a drowned rat without a trace of her immortal aura. Ji Yunyao had never thought that her shortcomings would be so blatantly exposed in front of everyone. Her body was very cold, but her face was as red as a purple eggplant. She wanted to jump into the water again and bury her body in the water to cover her embarrassment. Fortunately, these imperial guards were tactful. Seeing that she had climbed out of the water, they bowed and left. In the blink of an eye, they were all gone. Ji Yunyao was burning with anger. She looked around and said, "Where is that bitch?" Gu Xiaoqi had already come to her side. She took off a cloak and handed it to her. She sighed. She has left. Ji Yunyao wrapped the cloak tightly and scolded angrily. This bitch has evil intentions. She forced me into the water. I want to report this to my father and let him punish her. Gu Xiaoqi sneered secretly. Your father can't wait to curry favor with her. How can he punish her for such a small thing? Wouldn't it be embarrassing to complain? What's more, Ning Shuima didn't do anything. She didn't even curse. What was there to complain about? Gu Xiaoqi sighed softly. Princess, she is now in the middle of a raging fire. I'm afraid it won't work if we go and complain about her now. Why don't we wait for the right time and plan slowly? Ji Yunyao was originally angry because Gu Xiaoqi blindly called for help. Now that she heard her words, her heart moved. She felt that Gu Xiaoqi was quite considerate of her. She also knew that it wouldn't be good to complain at this time. She just wanted to find a way out. Xiaoqi, do you have any good ideas? Gu Xiaoqi's eyes flashed and she shook her head. Princess, this kind of thing can only be done according to the circumstances. We will find another opportunity in the future. No matter what, I will stand on your side. Ji Yunyao nodded. She knew that Gu Xiaoqi was very scheming. If she really got such a helper by her side, she would have one more think tank. Ning Shuima, Ning Shuima, Ning Shuima. She gritted her teeth and said this name in her heart. She clenched her fists tightly. Gu Xiaoqi held her arm and walked forward, serving her to change her clothes. She naturally sensed Ji Yunyao's tense muscles, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. Because Ning Shuima had already agreed to Han Shanyue's marriage, Lu Hinti could finally relax. Ning Shuima was no longer restrained, so this time, Ning Shuima rode Kiran out of the imperial garden easily. However, there was a group of bodyguards following behind her. They were sent by Lu Hinti. In name they were there to protect her, but in reality, they were afraid that she would run away before the wedding. Ning Xuemo rode Kiran in the front, followed by 18 elite palace guards in a fan-shaped formation. As they walked along the long street, they naturally attracted the attention of countless commoners. After so many things in the capital, most people already knew that she had a Kiran. Since that was the case, Ning Xuemo felt that there was no need to hide it anymore. Kiran was especially majestic today. Its blue scales shone like pearls under the sunlight. It walked forward with its head held high like a lion king, looking proud of its success. It attracted countless exclamations from passers-by. Some children followed behind curiously. Kiran, so this is a Kiran. So majestic. No, it is beautiful. Look at its 2 horns, so delicate. I guess it must be a female Kiran. Chapter 4:11. Kiran almost tripped when it heard the curious guesses behind it. What an ignorant kid. It was a male, not a female. The little Qilin fiercely swung its tail and shook its ears, allowing its horns to be more fully exposed. It was a male Kiran, and its horns had 3 forks. However, a female Kiran only had 2 forks. Look, Kiran is wagging its tail. It must agree with me. It is a female. My ahe always wags its tail when I guess its meaning correctly. The kid was very happy. Kiran wanted to slap him with its tail. I am a male. Kiran's roar was magnificent. It attracted more onlookers, and the discussion became louder. Wow, it can talk. It can hear us talking. That's great. Yes, its voice sounds so young. I guess it is only 7 or 8 years old. Such a young Kiran. The question of Kiran's gender was clarified, but because of its response, there were more guesses and discussions. It was even more lively than before. Some even began to guess that Kiran was an illegitimate child, and that was why it was wandering alone in the world. It had to be said that people's spirit of gossip was endless, and their imagination was huge. While Ning Xuemo rode the little Qilin back home, there were already many different versions of the story. The most ridiculous version was that Kiran was Ning Xuemo's illegitimate child in her previous life, and Kiran was looking for its mother, so it didn't mind that Ning Xuemo recognized him as its master. Kiran's ears were very sharp, and it heard most of the discussions. It was speechless. There were too many wild guesses, and it couldn't clarify them one by one. Master, did you hear what those people said? They are not right at all. Ning Xuemo raised her hand and rubbed Kiran's head. Good boy, they are talking about you, which means that you are very attractive to them. Why didn't you hear them talk about it when you were a cat? But I don't like them making wild guesses. I want to clarify, little apple, they're not talking about you for the truth at all. If you clarify this, they'll soon guess that it's that. There are so many people and so many mouths. Which one will you clarify? The more you clarified and argued with them, the more interested they would be. Even if they didn't want to guess, they would join in the discussion because of your response. Actually, they don't have any ill intentions towards you. They're just curious. You don't have to worry about it. Kiran seemed to understand, but he was still unhappy. But many of their guesses are wrong. Well, it's enough that you and your friends know the truth. You don't have to explain it to everyone. Kiran seemed to have understood something and stopped talking. This conversation was between Ning Xuemo and Kiran using telepathy. No one else could hear it. The leader of the guards behind Ning Xuemo was Shi Tianlong. He was ordered to follow beside Ning Xuemo and looked at her with a complicated gaze. He admired this girl very much. But he also unintentionally did a few things that hurt her, such as capturing her at the banquet last night, and monitoring her today. Although he was forced to do so, he still felt sorry for her in his heart. He felt guilty. Ning Xuemo finally returned to the Marquis Jinyuan's mansion. Ning Xuemo turned around and bowed to Shi Tianlong. General Shi, I have returned to the mansion. There's no need to send me off. Chapter 4:12. Shi Tianlong blushed and said, Marquis Ning, I'm sorry. His Majesty asked me to stay here and protect you for a few days. I dare not disobey the Emperor's orders. It was just as she had expected. It seemed like Emperor Lixian was afraid that she would change her mind and run away midway. Therefore, he sent people to monitor her residence until the day of the wedding. Ning Xuemo nodded and didn't say anything else. She rode the little Qilin into the palace. Shi Tianlong waved his hand and the guards dispersed. They must be looking for a good place to hide. Shi Tianlong braced himself and followed Ning Shuima into the house. Ning Shuima was a little puzzled. Old Zhong was a very good person. Every time she came back, he would lead a group of servants to welcome her at the door. This time she did not know what was going on. She had already entered the house, but he did not come out to welcome her. She did not even see anyone else. She faintly felt that something was wrong. When she entered the hall, she immediately felt uncomfortable. There was a person sitting on the main seat in the hall. His black hair was loose and his green robe was tattered. There were a few orchids on his green robe that danced with his movements. Han Shangyue. Why did he come to her house? He even sat on the main seat without any hesitation. Ning Shuima's eyes fell on the bottom of his green robe. He was wearing a pair of wooden clogs. He looked very comfortable and casual. Old Zhong was instructing two maids to wipe the furniture in the hall. They wiped it until it was spotless and even a fly would slip on it. Of course, there were no flies in the hall. When Ning Shuima came in, Han Shangyue looked up at her and said, "You're finally back?" He sounded like the male owner of the house. "Why are you here?" Ning Shuima's tone was not good. "The Taoist master's residence is being repaired. I've been here for a few days." Han Shangyue answered naturally. "I didn't invite you." Ning Shuima was not polite. "You are my concubine. Your residence is my residence. Why do I need you to invite me? I'm not your concubine now. She might not be in the future very soon." Han Shangyue answered casually, but it hit Ning Shuima's weak spot. Ning Shuima took a deep breath. She was a calm person. She was not angry. Damn it, it would be strange if she was not angry. Master Han, even if I marry you in 10 days, we are still not married yet. According to the customs of Vast Sky Empire, unmarried couples are not allowed to see each other 1 month before the wedding. Ning Shuima tried to reason with him. She had to chase him away so that she would have a chance to escape. "I'm not from Vast Sky Nation, and neither are you. There's no need to follow the customs of Vast Sky Nation. Furthermore, we are not engaged. You are only my concubine." Han Shangyue stretched out his legs and rested his chin on his palm. His fingers tapped on the table in boredom. His posture was indescribably lazy, yet indescribably attractive. The maid who was wiping the utensils in the hall would sneak glances at him from time to time. Her eyes were almost sparkling. Ning Shuima wanted to curse. Concubine, your sister." "Master Han, you are wrong. Although you are not from Vast Sky Nation, I am from Vast Sky Nation. Since I have to follow the rules of Vast Sky Nation. Are you sure you are?" Han Shanyue's eyes were fixed on her body. Ning Shuima's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that this person knew something? I am. She was not confident when she said this. Han Shangyue seemed to smile and did not talk to her anymore. He turned to Old Zhong and asked, "Is my residence ready?" Chapter 413. Old Zhong looked at his master, then looked at the seemingly lazy but powerful master Han Shangyue. He was slightly troubled. I'm already packing it up." Ning Shuima's face darkened. "Old Zhong, did I say I wanted him to stay?" Old Zhong coughed and said sincerely, "Master, since he will be your husband sooner or later, then he's the master of the house. You don't have to care so much." He was actually really happy for Ning Shuima. Ever since the name Heavenly Calamity Star spread throughout the capital, Old Zhong had been worried about Ning Shuima's future marriage. He was really worried. If Ning Shuima could not get married, how could he face Marquis Ning and his wife after 100 years? He did not expect that this master Han Shangyue would take in his master. Although she would only be a concubine, it was still better than his master being a spinster for the rest of her life or marrying a blind or bald man. Moreover, this Han Shangyue was so famous that his status was even higher than Ji Yunhuang and the others. What was even more rare was that he did not have any other women by his side. His master's status in marrying him was not high, but it was the same as being his official wife. Old Zhong was sincerely happy that his master was able to get such a good marriage. His master's current state was probably due to a little girl's embarrassment. It was normal for a little girl to be a little pretentious. Old Zhong expressed his understanding, so he could not help but say a few words. He was afraid that Ning Shuama was not sensible, and would anger this Master Han and break up this good marriage. Ning Shuama also knew that she could not chase him out even if she wanted to. This person's skin was much thicker than she had imagined. She coldly said, "As long as we are not married, he is not my husband, and he is not the master of the house. However, since this Mr. Han has nowhere to go, we will take him in for a few days in the spirit of humanity. Clean up the cold fragrance courtyard for him. It is suitable for him to live there." Old Zhong was a little troubled. Master Han has already chosen a place to live. It is at the Tide Listening Pavilion. The cold fragrance courtyard is not suitable for people to live in. Master was too negligent. The cold fragrance courtyard had a nice name, but it was actually a deserted courtyard. There were many weeds inside, and many old furniture was left in the courtyard. Even ordinary guests could not be entertained there. Not to mention a guest like Master Han. Tide Listening Pavilion. Wasn't that right next to where he lived? Ning Shuama's expression turned even uglier. Before she could say anything, a maidservant ran in and reported, "Heavenly Master, the Tide Listening Pavilion has been cleaned up. As per your orders, everything in the pavilion has been replaced with new ones and cleaned 6 times with clean water." Han Shangyue nodded slightly and finally stood up. Without looking at Ning Shuama, he walked out. Ning Shuama really wanted to kick his butt. How dare he come to her house and be so misophobic? She secretly clenched her fists. Kiran sensed her emotional fluctuations and hurriedly comforted her. "Master, calm down. You are not his opponent. You will only be at a disadvantage if you attack him. Besides, you have so many houses here, one more person won't be a big deal. Just treat it as if you are raising an extra pig." Ning Shuama was originally so angry that she wanted to explode, but when she heard the little Qilan's telepathic message, she almost burst out laughing. "Yes, just treat it as if we are raising an extra pig." Just as they were talking, Han Shangyue, who had already walked to the door, suddenly turned around and his gaze landed on Kiran. Chapter 414. After all, Kiran had a guilty conscience, so it looked back at him warily. "Little apple, right?" Yes. What can I do for you?" Kiran tried its best to remain calm. It did not know why, but it had a bone-deep fear of this man, as if it had been taken advantage of by him before. "Since you have recognized her as your master, then I will be your master in the future. I have prepared a gift for you." Han Shanyue's voice was still kind. Kiran was still a child, so when it heard that there was a gift, its eyes lit up. "What gift?" Han Shanyue waved his sleeve and a faint white light flashed. A rectangular crystal trough appeared on the ground, sparkling and translucent. It was quite beautiful. "Little apple, this is a gift from me. You can use it to eat in the future." After saying this, he turned around and walked out. Kiran looked at the crystal trough and felt that there was something strange about it, but it could not pinpoint what was strange about it. It had a curious personality, so it could not help but sniff it and touch it with its little paws from time to time. Ning Shuama's lips twitched. Wasn't this a trough for pigs? But it was made of crystal. But even if it was made of crystal, it was still a trough for pigs. She kindly explained to the little Qilan, and the little Qilan immediately jumped away and stayed far away from the crystal trough. Too hateful. He actually wants to feed a dignified Kiran like a pig. It suddenly thought of something and asked timidly, "Master, could it be that he can eavesdrop on our telepathic conversation? Did it even need to be said?" Ning Shuama nodded solemnly. How powerful was this person's kung fu? He could actually hear the telepathic conversation between her and Kiran. Ning Shuama never underestimated her opponents, but she realized that she had underestimated this person. His kung fu was like the deep sea, and she could not measure his depth at all. She could not help but raise her hand to rub her forehead. It seemed that it would be difficult for her to escape in the future. She and Kiran looked at each other and saw the words difficult, difficult, difficult in each other's eyes. Kiran's gaze suddenly landed on Ning Shuama's face. Her large eyes filled with curiosity. "Master, why is there a cinnabar mole on your forehead?" "Huh?" Ning Shuama raised her hand to touch between her eyebrows. She didn't feel anything, so she immediately looked for a mirror. She looked at herself in the mirror and was stunned. There was indeed a small cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. The cinnabar mole was hexagonal and shaped like a snowflake. It was neatly placed between her eyebrows and added a lot of color to her small face. The cinnabar mole wasn't visible on the surface of her skin, but rather seemed to have been drawn on with a brush. Ning Xuemo raised her hand and rubbed it. It was still slightly warm. She remembered the ball of lightning that had suddenly struck her forehead. This thing couldn't have been created by the lightning, right? What did this mark represent? She had read in some fantasy male novels in her previous life that some male protagonists were struck by lightning. In the end, they were struck by lightning and became a genius. From then on, they were invincible in the 3 realms. They even fought their way out of the universe and out of the solar system. Would it be the same for her? She tried to circulate her psychokinesis, but it didn't seem to have increased. She tried to wash it with water, but no matter what she did, it couldn't be washed off. It was like a tattoo. Ning Xuemo carefully recalled what happened before the lightning struck. Suddenly her body froze. It seemed that she had just agreed to Han Shanyue's marriage when the ball of lightning struck. Could this cinnabar mole be the mark of her marriage? Chapter 4:15. Can't be. It can't be that perverted, right? Ning Xuemo summoned a knowledgeable maid and asked her if a woman in this world would receive a heavenly omen if she accepted someone's proposal. For example, being struck by lightning. The maid shook her head and said she had never heard of such a thing. After sending the maid out, Ning Xuemo rubbed the cinnabar mole between her eyebrows and felt a little tired. Forget it, let's not think about this anymore. There were too many strange things that had happened to her, and this one was not a big deal. She walked out of the door but did not find Shi Tianlong, who had been guarding the door. She walked around the manor but did not find any traces of the other imperial guards. She was a little puzzled and called Old Zhong to ask. Old Zhong reported to her, "Little mistress, General Shi and the rest were sent away by Mr. Han." Ning Xuemo was speechless. Weren't Shi Tianlong and the rest ordered to protect her? How could they be sent away so easily by Mr. Han? Her expression did not look too good. This was obviously her territory, but that person did not dare to force his way in and even used her authority as the owner. How could he? Ning Xuemo felt that her position was in danger. She sneered, "Who does he think he is? Sending people away from me so easily? I'm your future husband." A faint voice sounded behind her. Ning Xuemo turned her head and saw Han Shanyue leisurely strolling towards her from the other end of the path. He stopped about 10 meters away from her. "Those people were only ordered to keep an eye on you, and not let you escape for the next 10 days. I found them annoying and sent them away for you. Why? Are you not satisfied? Mr. Han, please remember that this is my home. If I want to send someone away, I don't need to trouble you." Ning Xuemo did not want to talk to him anymore and turned to leave. Han Shanyue stood there and didn't say anything else. He only looked at her back with a look of contemplation. Old Zhong held his breath as he stood to the side. Although it was broad daylight and the sun was shining brightly, Mr. Han's face was clearly exposed, but he still couldn't see his face clearly. After all, Old Zhong was a knowledgeable man. He knew that there was a type of martial art called face-concealing technique in this world. It could cover one's face without a mask, making it impossible for others to see it clearly. Even if they did see it clearly, it wouldn't leave an impression in their mind and they would forget it in the blink of an eye. In order to cultivate this kind of martial arts, one needed to be at least at Earth rank level 9. There were not many people on this continent who could reach this level. One could count them on one's fingers. This kind of top-notch expert actually became the beloved guest of the Marquis of Jingyuan's estate. Old Zhong was happy for his young master from the bottom of his heart. Seeing that his young master did not give the venerable one any face and left in a huff, he was afraid that the venerable one would hold a grudge against his young master. So he hurriedly said, "Mr. Han, my master has encountered too many things recently, so her temperament is a little strange. Actually, she's usually quite easy to talk to, and her temperament is also very gentle." She had a gentle temperament? She was just a facade, wasn't she? Deep down, she was a rebellious little fox. Han Shanyue turned around and sat down on a stone bench at the side. His eyes turned to Old Zhong. "What happened to her recently? Why don't you tell us?" He sat there under a flowering tree. There were countless petals on the tree that fluttered down in the autumn wind, but not a single one landed on his body. They didn't even dare to float in his direction. Chapter 4:16. He had an aura that made people hold their breaths in front of him, not daring to breathe too loudly. Of course they didn't dare to lie. Old Zhong didn't trust people easily, but he inexplicably trusted this Master Han. He respectfully told him about the things that Ning Xuema had encountered recently. Of course he only told him what he knew. Han Shangyue listened to him without saying a word. He knew some of these things but he didn't know some of them. Ning Xuema was exhausted last night by the old emperor's lobbyists. Not long after she returned to the residence, she went to her room to sleep. This sleep was exceptionally sweet, lasting from 10 o'clock in the morning until evening. When she woke up, she opened her eyes and found that the light of the setting sun had shone through the curtains and was shining on a person in front of the window. That person's back was facing her, and he was drawing on a table under the window. The sunlight coated his body with a layer of golden light, making him look very elegant and beautiful. However, the moment Ning Xuema saw him, the beautiful sleep that she had just had flew away. She sat up abruptly. "Why are you here?" Ning Xuema had always been very particular about where she slept and paid attention to privacy. She didn't allow anyone to enter her room. She even set up a spell outside her room. If anyone wanted to enter her room, they would have to break through the spell first. If someone tried to break through the spell, there was no way that she wouldn't know. That person was naturally Han Shangyue. He didn't answer Ning Xuema's question, but instead raised the painting in his hand. "How did you meet him?" When Ning Xuema saw the painting clearly, her heart skipped a beat. The painting was of a man in red. He had beautiful facial features, elegant demeanor, and his red clothes were as dazzling as the morning sun. It was Shuilan. That red-clothed evildoer had been drawn into 3 parts by Han Shangyue with a single stroke. It was as if he could walk out of the painting immediately. "You saw him?" Ning Xuema blurted out. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, it would have been impossible for him to draw it so accurately. A dark light flashed through Han Shanyue's eyes. He asked again, "How did you meet him?" His voice seemed to have lowered by 2 degrees. Ning Xuema ignored him. She stretched on the bed and said lazily, "Why do you care how I met you?" She lifted the quilt and wanted to get out of bed. Han Shanyue waved his sleeve and a faint white light flashed. Ning Xuema's body stiffened. Damn it, she couldn't move again. She was trying to get off the bed, but halfway through he used the body-fixing spell on her. Her body leaned forward, and one of her legs was below her. This position was extremely uncomfortable. Ning Xuema angrily looked up and saw Han Shanyue slowly walking towards her. Ning Xuema's heart beat wildly from the inexplicably powerful aura emanating from his body. She glared at him. What are you doing?" He walked closer step by step and finally stopped in front of her bed. He was less than half a meter away from her. A very dangerous distance. He looked at her condescendingly and slowly spat out 3 words. "What do you think?" His posture was too dangerous. A faint fragrance surrounded her, as if he could push her down at any time. Ning Xuema couldn't move. Otherwise, she would have already shrunk to the corner of the bed. He slowly bent down and slowly reached out his hand to her. Ning Xuema was shocked. He wouldn't take her now, right? "Han Shanyue, don't mess around. We haven't married yet, you can't." Her shout was cut off by his outstretched finger. Chapter 4:17. His white jade-like middle finger touched the space between her eyebrows as his voice echoed in her ears. "Ning Xuema, I don't have much patience. Since you don't want to tell me, I can only personally obtain it." His finger was slightly cold, as if there was a weak current flowing from his fingertip and into her brain from her forehead. Ning Xuema felt a loud bang in her head. The images of Shui Ilan in her memory were like flowing water, forcefully opened by a force and replayed in her mind. After a while, Han Shanyue retracted his finger and released the body-fixing technique on Ning Xuema. Han Shanyue's expression was not good and his voice was slightly cold. "So that's how you released that scourge. You really are a troublemaker. If I had known earlier, I would have..." He suddenly stopped talking because Ning Xuema was rushing towards him. The cold light in front of his eyes was dazzling as it went straight for his chest. Han Shanyue didn't seem to expect that she would suddenly attack him. His body leaned to the side, and with a flip, he dodged her blade and grabbed her wrist. "Are you crazy?" Ning Shuama did not say anything and used her other hand to hit his head. Bastard, go to hell. Han Shangyue had to restrain her other hand as well. The difference in their kung fu was too great. Ning Shuama's kung fu was not on the same level as his. In the blink of an eye, her body was restrained by him and she could not move. Ning Shuama, what are you doing? Han Shangyue frowned and looked at her. He did not understand where her killing intent came from. Ning Shuama was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Although her body could not move, her eyes stared fiercely at him. You pervert, peeping Tom, kill me. He did not ask for her permission and directly read her memories. He did not care about her privacy at all. What did he think she was? A vessel? Han Shangyue. Ning Shuama's blood rushed to her head, and she continued to scold. So what if you're skilled in martial arts? Do you think you can do whatever you want to others? What right do you have to read my memories? Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? This was probably the first time in his life that Han Shangyue had been scolded like this. He was startled and frowned again. I did not retrieve all of your memories, only the ones related to Shui Yilan. He could even read all of her thoughts. Ning Shuama's pretty face flushed red with anger. You can't just take a part of it. This is an invasion of privacy, do you understand? Don't say that you're my fiancé. Even if you're my biological father, you can't do it. She was already feeling aggrieved when she was forced to agree to this marriage. Now that this matter had become the fuse, she simply exploded. Not only was her face flushed red, but her eyes were also misty with tears. Seeing her like this, Han Shangyue paused for a moment before saying, in this world, the strong are respected. If you don't want your privacy to be violated, then become strong. He turned around and walked out. When he reached the door, his footsteps stopped again. I'm not interested in your privacy. I won't do it again in the future. His sleeves fluttered and in a moment he was far away. Not long after, Ning Shuama finally regained her freedom. She slowly sat down on the bed and closed her eyes. She had to think of a way to escape. Otherwise, she would be invisible in front of him in the future. She sat on the bed for a while, and her rationality slowly came back. Thinking of her outburst just now, she suddenly shivered. Chapter 418. She actually lost her mind and scolded this powerful person in front of him. She even stabbed him with a knife. Master Han's martial arts were too high. He could kill her with just a raise of his hand. When she was scolding him, she could even feel the killing intent from him. It was too irrational for her to provoke him like this now. Ning Shuama was not someone who could be easily angered, but she didn't know why she couldn't control her temper in front of this person. She sat for a while and suddenly thought of something. She ran to the door and her heart sank. The array outside her door was still there, untouched. But he just walked out like he was taking a stroll in the park, treating her array like it was nothing. It seemed that he could come and go as he pleased. There were no more secrets in her room. Ning Shuama's veins on her forehead throbbed in pain. This person's temper was too unpredictable. What if he came to her room in the middle of the night? She shivered. Ning Shuama obviously worried too much. From that day onwards, Ning Shuama did not enter her room. In the residence, Ning Shuama rarely bumped into him. Even if she bumped into him, he would just nod slightly and walk past her. Just like the saying, mutual respect was as cold as ice. These few days, Ning Shuama's life was relatively peaceful and orderly. Every day, besides refining medicine, practicing martial arts, and reading books, she also liked to go out shopping. He traveled to the east, strolled to the west, shopped to the pharmacy, shopped to the clothing store, shopped to the utensils. There was no place that she couldn't go. 2 days ago, she often heard gossip about herself on the streets. But when a topic was talked about for a long time and there was no real follow-up, people gradually lost interest. There was no lack of gossip in the streets, but recently, people's topic was attracted by another matter. Recently, there were often young girls going missing in the capital. In 6 days, 8 young girls had already gone missing. These young girls had all kinds of identities. There was a daughter of a rich family, a pretty girl from a small family, and a prostitute from a music studio. These girls went missing in different places. Some went missing at home, some went missing when they went out to buy things, and one even went missing when she went out to play with her fiancé. Ning Shuama didn't care much about this kind of missing persons case. Since ancient times there had been no shortage of such cases. It was most likely that some human trafficking group had come to the city and abducted these young girls to be sold. This kind of missing persons case was the most difficult. If she was free, she might even help the public get rid of the evil, search for clues and find out who was behind this. But now, as the wedding date approached, her mind was filled with thoughts of escaping. Although she did not have many chances to meet Han Shangyue these days, it did not mean that he was not secretly watching her. Therefore, she came out to wander around every day. Firstly, she wanted to dispel his wariness. Secondly, she wanted to see if he had any methods to spy on her. She didn't believe that he would send those guards back and let her escape. He must have some way to monitor her. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy could you win 100 battles. Only by knowing his methods could she plan her escape route. Ning Xuema didn't know if it was because he was too good at monitoring her, or because he didn't pay attention to her whereabouts at all, but she didn't notice him following her even once. Not to mention him, she didn't even have any guards. Ning Xuema's anti-tracking skills were superb. If someone was following her, she could detect it in a moment. No one could escape her intuition. Chapter 419. For the past few days she did not feel anyone following her. In order to test the waters, Ning Xuema purposely returned home late at night. When she returned, the mansion was quiet. The servants were doing their own things. Some were patrolling, some were resting. Only the loyal old Zhong was waiting for her at the entrance of the mansion. When he saw her return safely, he was relieved. He was worried that something had happened to her. She pretended to ask about the situation in the mansion. Old Zhong replied that nothing had happened in the mansion. Mr. Han also came back and went out regularly. Moreover, he would only stay in his own courtyard and would not go anywhere else. He never asked about Ning Xuema's whereabouts. Young master, forgive me for asking, but what happened between the two of you? He felt that something had happened between his master and Mr. Han. They were in a cold war. Ning Xuema seemed to be relieved. She waved her hand and said, "Nothing." Then she walked inside. "Young master, it's better if you don't go out for the next few days. It's not peaceful outside. You don't bring anyone with you. I'm worried." Ning Xuema turned to look at him and said, "Uncle Zhong, you also heard about the missing girls?" "Yes, I heard that 7 of them went missing. They can't be found anymore." Old Zhong was worried. "Don't worry, I won't go missing. If they really go missing." Ning Xuema blinked her eyes and said, "I won't let Uncle Zhong worry about me." Old Zhong couldn't help but sigh. "Young master, I know that you're skilled and brave, but I heard that there were many psychokinesis masters among the missing girls. Some of them were even called geniuses. Even the emperor was furious and ordered the authorities to investigate." "Okay, I know. I'll be careful." Ning Xuema stretched again and said, "Uncle Zhong, I'm so tired. You don't have to talk anymore. Go and rest. It's getting late." She did not want to listen to Uncle Zhong's nagging and quickly went back to her courtyard. Her courtyard was right next to Han Shanyue's courtyard. When she went back to her courtyard, she passed by his courtyard. Perhaps this Master Han was truly skilled and daring. Regardless of whether he was in the courtyard or not, the courtyard door was always half open and never closed. When Ning Xuema passed by his courtyard, she casually glanced inside and paused for a moment. Han Shanyue was sitting under a grape trellis in the courtyard, admiring the moon and painting. Rather than admiring the moon, it was better to say admiring the stars. Because it was close to the end of the month, there was only a crescent moon left on the moon. The moonlight was dim, but the stars in the sky were bright. He was sitting on a rattan chair, holding a cup in one hand and tapping the rattan chair with the other. He looked very relaxed. The hazy starlight outlined his silhouette in the moonlight, giving him a hazy sense of beauty. Absolutely stunning. Poetic and picturesque. Ning Xuema immediately thought of these 2 words. Although she didn't like this kind of handsome man, it didn't mean that she didn't appreciate it. At this moment, Ning Xuema seemed to have forgotten her usual disgust for him. She looked at him with pure appreciation for a few seconds. This person's temperament was really unparalleled. Just by casually lying down, he was like a pleasing painting. No wonder so many girls were crazy for him. He really did have some capital. If he wasn't so hateful, she might have been attracted to him. She was suddenly shocked. What was she thinking? She didn't like this type. How could she be attracted to him? Chapter 420. She shook her head and was about to leave when Han Shangyue, who was half lying on the rattan chair, seemed to have sensed something and suddenly turned to look at her. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Although she couldn't see his face clearly, she could feel that his gaze was on her body. Their gazes met for a brief moment. Ning Xuema calmly nodded her head at him, which could be considered a greeting. She then turned around to leave. Wait. The person in the courtyard suddenly spoke, his voice as cold as ever. What's the matter? Ning Xuema stopped, still standing outside the door. Come in and talk. Are you afraid that I'll eat you? It's late at night. It's not very convenient for a man and woman to be alone. Master, if you have something to say, just say it. Ning Xuema did not move. You still care about this? Han Shanyue's voice was flat, and she could not tell if he was happy or angry. But Ning Xuema felt that his tone was a little sarcastic. She was too lazy to pay attention to it and turned to leave. Her feet seemed to be pulled by something, and she could not help but fall back, directly into his courtyard. The force pulling her back was too great. She simply couldn't control it. In the end, when she was about to fall back to his rattan chair, the force suddenly loosened and disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuema almost fell on him. She hurriedly used a stake to stabilize herself. You. She looked at him angrily. At this moment she was less than 2 feet away from him. It was a very dangerous distance, and she could smell the special fragrance on his body. We are engaged, so it's very convenient for a man and a woman to be alone, Han Shanyue said slowly, and pointed to the stone bench next to him. Sit there. Ning Xuema secretly took a breath. The gap between their strengths was too big, and it was not appropriate for her to fight with him face to face. She calmed herself down, sat down on the stone bench and looked at him. What do you want? Why are you speaking so stiffly to me? Han Shanyue put one elbow on the armrest of the rattan chair. Half of his head was propped up, and his black hair flowed down like water. He looked less cold and more lazy. He dragged her in like this and he still expected her to talk to him nicely? How shameless was he? Ning Xuema's voice was also cold. Then how do you want me to talk to you? Although we are engaged, you don't treat me like your fiancé, do you? I'm just a concubine. Even if we are concubines, we are still husband and wife. In the future, I will also be your husband. Ning Xuema choked. Husband? What a strange word. She couldn't apply this word to the man in front of her. Moreover, this person would not become her husband. If there were no accidents, she would run away. Ning Xuema knew that the person in front of her was too perverted and could retrieve her memories, so she restrained her emotions and stood up. It's getting late. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. How's the wedding dress? Han Shanyue asked from behind her. It's just marrying a concubine. There's no need to prepare a wedding dress. When the time comes, I'll just wear a new dress. Ning Xuema answered casually. Anyway, she wouldn't be the bride that day. You really didn't prepare anything? Han Shanyue's voice became cold again. There were only 3 days until their wedding day. She had been wandering around outside every day. Did she not prepare anything that the bride's side of the family should prepare for the wedding? Of course she didn't prepare anything. She didn't want to marry him. Ning Xuema was also afraid that he would be suspicious, so she blushed. This is my first time experiencing it. I don't know what to prepare. Then I'll ask old Zhong to prepare for me tomorrow. Chapter 421. Han Shanyue was speechless. His voice was half cold and half warm. It's my first time too. Then have you prepared the groom's robe? Ning Xuema asked him back. I don't like red. Han Shanyue slowly sat up straight. You like red? Me? I'm fine with it. But you're just marrying a concubine this time. So it's okay if you don't wear the red groom's robe. You're going to marry a wife in the future, so you have to wear it even if you don't like it. Otherwise, the bride's family won't be happy. Ning Xuema's tone was serious. Han Shanyue stared at her. You still want to see me marry a wife? What does it have to do with me whether you marry a wife or not? Ning Xuema rolled her eyes in her heart. You see, you're marrying a concubine, so you'll definitely marry a wife in the future. Your wife is the one who will accompany you for the rest of your life, so you still have to show her respect. For example, for a grand wedding, you have to prepare a phoenix coronet for her, instead of letting the bride do it herself. For example, even if you don't like red, you still have to wear the red groom's robe. You care about these. It's not that I care, but your future wife will care. In the future, when you meet the girl you like and want to marry her, you'll naturally understand. You'll be afraid that she'll be wrong, so you'll give her the best. Alright, it's getting late. I really have to go and rest. Ning Xuema waved her hand at him and turned to leave. You don't have to prepare the wedding dress. When she was almost at the door, he added another sentence. Ning Xuema's footsteps paused slightly. Okay. It seemed that he finally understood that the wedding dress was something that only the wife would prepare. He didn't let her prepare it because he knew that she didn't need it for a concubine. She didn't know why, but she felt a little uncomfortable. Just as she was about to leave his courtyard, he added, Tomorrow noon is the ceremony for me to become a Taoist master. You can come and watch the ceremony. Ning Xuema casually uttered an "oh" and walked away. The ceremony for becoming a Taoist master should be very lively and interesting. However, this was also a rare opportunity to escape, so she had to grasp it. Ning Xuemo returned to her room. Just as she was about to take off her clothes and get into bed, she suddenly sensed something and turned around abruptly. Who is it? The window opened by itself and a person jumped in. In the dark night, that person's figure was extremely familiar. Shiju. He was actually wearing the uniform of a guard in the Marquis's estate, looking shrewd and valiant. Ning Xuema didn't expect him to come, especially in the middle of the night. Shouldn't he have returned to his Bright King clan? Shijua, why are you here? You're even wearing such a set of clothes. My little temple can't accommodate a great deity like you. You should have sent someone to inform me of your arrival. I would have welcomed you very grandly, Ning Xuema said half-jokingly. She really had a good impression of this young man and looked at him as if he was her own little brother. Official identities can't enter. Shiju was dressed in black and stood there like a shadow. Ah, it can't be, right? My main door isn't sealed, so you can enter and leave as you wish. It isn't sealed, but there are hidden checkpoints on all the roads leading to Marquis Ning's estate. No official's carriage is allowed to enter your Marquis Ning's estate. It's said that the Taoist master likes peace and quiet, so he refuses any visitors. He's also staying in your estate, so Shiju explained. His brows furrowed and his fingers secretly clenched. Ning Xuema. She had neglected this problem. These days, Marquis Ning's estate had been in troubled times. Chapter 422. These days, Marquis Ning's residence had been troubled. The officials all wanted to stay as far away from the residence as possible. Almost no one came to visit her Marquis Ning estate. Therefore, she didn't take it to heart that there were so few people in front of her door these 2 days. Now that she thought about it, it was not normal. She was now the Heavenly Master's concubine, and that super awesome Heavenly Master was living in her mansion. Even the Emperor had to curry favor with this Heavenly Master when he saw him. There was no reason why those officials who were smarter than monkeys would not come to congratulate her. Now that she thought about it, it seemed that the Taoist master had rejected all the troublesome gifts in advance so that no one dared to come. You're not an official of Chongkong country. If you insist on paying them a visit, would they really dare to stop you? Ning Xuemo raised her hand and poured a cup of tea for him. Come, since you're a guest, drink this cup first. Shiju didn't take the tea from her. He raised his hand and held her hand. Under the candlelight, he looked at her with a burning gaze. Xuema, come with me. The young man's hand was not big enough, but it was very strong. Ning Xuema's wrist hurt from his grip. She looked at him, but her feet did not move. Go? Where to? Anywhere. It's better than waiting here. Do you really want to marry him? Shijua was a man of action. He pulled her out. Ning Xuema's feet seemed to have grown roots. She did not take back her hand and only asked him, Shijua, where can you bring me to? Does the Bright King residence dare to fall out with Han Shanyue? Shijua choked. This is my personal decision. It has nothing to do with the Bright King residence. Besides, he is just a painter and does not have much power. So what if he is the Taoist master of Chongkong country? He can't send troops to attack the Bright King residence because of this. Even if he attacks the Bright King residence, we may not lose. It is hard to say who will win. I believe that Lu Henti is not so stupid. Ning Xuema sighed. Although Shijue was smart, he was still a 15-year-old child. Shiju, do you think this Han Shanyue is really a loner without any power? Shiju was stunned. Isn't that so? I've sent people to sort out his information. Although his whereabouts are a bit mysterious, he's still a very good person. But every time he appeared, he was alone. He was just an art saint with high martial arts skills. If the vast Sky Empire doesn't stand up for him, he won't be able to contend against the wise King Manor. Ning Xuema could not help but rub the space between her eyebrows. She patted his hand and said in a serious tone, Shijue, you're going to be Wisdom King's successor in the future. You can't consider things so simply. Shiju looked at her with his eyes wide open. What do you mean? Think about it carefully. This Han Shanyue has been famous for more than 60 years. He always has an endless supply of rare treasures on him. Many of them are rare in this world. If such a fat sheep does not have a hidden power by his side, would those big families and clans allow him to live so freely? Shiju. That was true. In fact, whether it was a country or a gang, they needed a lot of money to maintain their normal operations. You can never have too much money. This money might not be earned openly. There were also some under-the-table operations. For example, killing people for their money, or killing the rich to help the poor. And this Mr. Han was precisely such a fat sheep. Ning Xuema continued, no matter how strong a person is, he can't contend against a country or a gang. Chapter 423. If he was a general without an army, even if he had the ability to reach the heavens, there would be a time when he would take a nap. Those forces in the open and in the dark would have made their move long ago. How could he have survived until now? Shiju said, you mean he really has a force by his side? But how come no one has ever seen it before? Ning Xuema nodded, there must be. And it must be an extremely powerful force. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to be so secretive and not leave any traces. I believe that there were many gangs that made their move, but they were all easily dealt with by his secret forces. That's why everyone is afraid. They have to be respectful to him. Shiju slightly clenched his fist. Those elders in the Bright King Manor had also said that before. Ning Xuema continued to analyze. Also, this person has a natural noble temperament. One look and you can tell that he has been in a high position for a long time. It's not something that a so-called art saint or fortune teller can have. In her previous life, she had seen many awesome artists. They were also arrogant, but that was the arrogance of cultured people. But not like Han Shanyu. Ning Xuema felt that even George W. Bush did not have this kind of aura. This kind of aura was not faked but naturally brought out. This kind of noble aura that came out of his bones was scary. The forces behind this kind of person were usually not small. In her previous life, she had seen something similar on a triad boss who had been passed down for 3 generations and had absolute influence all over the world. But compared to this Han Shanyue's aura, the difference was too great. This person's status was definitely not low. Shiju was stunned for a moment. Been in a high position for a long time? Then who is his other identity? I have seen many of the main leaders of the major forces on this continent and have also heard of many, but I have never heard of anyone like him. Ning Xuema softly spat out 3 words. What about Di Zun? Shiju was stunned for a moment, then shook his head. It's definitely not him. What kind of status does Di Zun have? Why would he lower himself to be a small heavenly master in Chong Kong country? With this status, I don't even deserve to carry his shoes. She glanced at Ning Xuema again. She wanted to say something but hesitated. Ning Xuema had a hunch that he wouldn't say anything nice, but she still needed to listen to him so that she could make a better judgment. So she glared at him and said, if you want to say something, just say it. You're not a man if you're hemming and hawing. Shiju was provoked by her words of not being a man, and immediately said the rest of what he wanted to say. Di Zun's status is not ordinary. Furthermore, he had long since severed his emotions and desires. No, he was emotionless and desireless. He would not have any real interactions with any woman. Even when he went out on patrol, the girls beside the sedan only followed him out. He didn't speak more than 3 sentences to them in a year. Do you know who those girls are? Ning Shuima had never heard of this before. She shook her head slightly. What's his identity? At most, they are geniuses from various countries. Shiju shook his head and sighed. It's not that simple. Those girls were all psychokinesis geniuses. There was no doubt about that. Among them, there were a few who had very noble statuses. For example, there was the Miss of the Nangong family and the daughter of the sect leader of Sky Music School. There were also some in my Bright King residence. She was my half-sister. And there was even a princess from the royal family. Ning Shuima blinked her eyes. So there were so many sects and countries that sent spies to his side. This is also good. Since you sects have sent people to his side, it will be more convenient for you to handle matters in the future. Chapter 424. Shiju's face darkened. What spy? The most important rule for anyone who works for the ancestor is to sever all ties with their own sect or country. During this period, they are not allowed to have any contact with their family. Violators will be immediately expelled from the Sun Moon sect. So abnormal. Severing ties with family is even stricter than becoming a monk. There's actually such an abnormal rule. I'm afraid these girls are not willing, right? Shiju smiled bitterly. You're wrong. They're very willing. For such a limited number of places, they're fighting to the death. Those who can go are all top figures. Running for this position is 100 times more difficult than becoming a disciple of the Sun Moon sect. These girls will be changed every 3 years. So it's only 3 years of work. After 3 years, they can go back to their families? Of course. After 3 years, even if they don't want to, they have to come back. Because this is the ancestors' iron rule. No one can violate it. That's not bad. However, since they've been working for the ancestor for such a long time, they should have a lot of contact with him, right? They should also know a lot about the Sun Moon sect. Ning Shuima guessed. Even the most mysterious sect, if one stayed in the core group for 3 years, they would more or less understand it. Shiju shook his head. When they came back, they didn't mention anything about the Sun Moon sect. It seems that they have forgotten everything about the ancestor. Once, someone wanted to know more about the ancestor from their mouths, and specially sent a high-level hypnotist to hypnotize them. However, it was useless. They only vaguely remember that they were working for the ancestor, but they forgot what the ancestor looked like. Perhaps they have never seen him before. Forgotten? Could it be that their memories were erased? Or perhaps they were given some kind of forgetful drug? Ning Shuima's heart moved. She blurted out, "Do you think the ancestor and them had something?" The ancestor was afraid that it would affect his image, so he made them lose their memories? Shiju's face darkened. He said impolitely, "What kind of mess is your head full of? The ancestor wouldn't be so tasteless. Those girls are called saintesses. When they go, they are virgins. When they come back, they are still virgins. They can still marry. Moreover, they are all outstanding talents." Okay, she was thinking the wrong way. It seemed like the ancestor just didn't want these women to spread the news about the Sun Moon sect. He had no other intentions. She paused and suddenly looked up at Shiju. "Why are you suddenly talking about them? What does that have to do with me?" Shiju coughed and said, "I just want to prove that the ancestor is not this Han Shangyue. Just think about it. Even the most inconspicuous maids around the ancestor are all geniuses with noble statuses. If he wanted a concubine, the conditions would be even higher. He was afraid that if he let out the slightest bit of news, there would be a large number of people crying and begging to marry him. Why would he need to go to such great lengths to scheme against you?" Ning Shuima. She cast a sidelong glance at him. "Do you mean that I'm not worth his scheming? He gave me a concubine and I still have to be grateful to him." Shiju had a headache. "I'm talking about Dizun. Dizun wouldn't be so bored. As for Han Shangyue, it was hard to say. The ancestor was the guardian of this continent. How could he have the time to care about the mortal world? Not to mention using such despicable methods to scheme against you and make you a concubine. Moreover, I also received accurate news that the ancestor is still a guest in Aquamarine. It is impossible for him to come here. Therefore, this Han Shangyue is definitely not him." Chapter 425. It's not him. Ning Shuama pondered for a while. It really didn't seem to be him. Although the two of them had similar temperaments, Dizun seemed to be colder. He was the kind that carried a strong chill even in the summer. Han Shanyue's was not as serious. More importantly, Dizun's eyes were black while Han Shanyue's were dark blue. He couldn't be like the modern people and wear cosmetic contact lenses, right? Then what kind of power was behind Han Shanyue? It was so secretive and so strong. It seemed like it was not inferior to the top sections. Why did he deliberately want to marry her as a concubine? She really couldn't think of anything that could make him covet her. She was pondering when Shijue suddenly grabbed her hand. Shijue's voice was a little anxious. Don't think about these useless things now. Take advantage of the night and leave with me. Leave with him? Leaving with him would only implicate him. He was only the wise king's heir, not the wise king. He had a fiery heart, but he didn't have strong wings to protect her. If she really left with him, not only would she implicate him and cause him to lose his position as the wise king's heir, she would also be hunted down by both the wise king residents and Chongkong country. The far-sighted king's people would never allow their crown prince to get together with a jinx with a notorious reputation. By then, she would face more pressure and be in more danger. Shijue, how did you get rid of the guards that were following you? Ning Shuama suddenly asked. Shijue didn't hesitate. Getting rid of them wasn't too difficult. I used the excuse of going to the toilet. Suddenly he realized something and frowned. Shuma, why are you asking this? Ning Shuama sighed. You came to find me without telling the wise king residents, right? This? Shijue was speechless for a moment. He paused for a moment before saying, why would I need their permission to do anything? They are just guards. But they represent your father's generation, and are following your father's orders. I'm sorry, Shijue, I can't implicate you. I can't leave with you. Ning Shuama broke free from Shijue's hand and stepped back to sit on the chair. Shijue was anxious. What do you mean by implicating me? I'm not afraid of being implicated. Follow me. Do you really want to marry that pervert? He took a step forward and pulled her again. Whoosh! A streak of faint red flew in from outside the door, brushing past Shiju's fingertips and hitting the teacup on the table. With a loud bang, the teacup that Ning Shuama had brought to Shijue was smashed into pieces. Shijue was taken aback. He subconsciously glanced over and found that the thing that broke the teacup was actually a soft leaf. It was stuck on the table like a trembling butterfly. Who trespassed into Miss Ning's residence? Shiju's duty as a guard was taken over, and he forgot his identity for a moment. With a flash of his figure, he had already passed through the door. Ning Shuama's expression changed, and she hurriedly followed him out. There was a maple tree in the corner of her yard. It was already autumn. The maple leaves were red, as bright as fire. On one of the thin branches of the maple tree sat a man in a moonlight robe. His hair was like ink satin and his clothes were like fine clouds. In his hand was a white jade flute. The wind blew his black hair and white robe, making the brilliant maple tree dim in an instant. It was as if the moonlight in the sky only flowed for him. Han Shanyu. When Shijue saw him, his expression changed slightly. Mr. Han, what are you doing here in Miss Ning's room so late at night? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.